story begins with a system message saying that a special being of calamity called Demon Lord had been born. Right after, a woman with golden horns, white wings, and white hair began a speech in front of a huge army of skeletons whom she called her followers, and told them the time to face the humans had finally come. In fact, she proclaimed that from that moment onward, they were at war with all the countries that were part of the human race. Then she added that with their power, they would show humanity that she was the supreme ruler of that continent. With the development of virtual reality, life would have become unthinkable without it, be it in healthcare, finance, education, or manufacturing. Moreover, there was also one game that had just announced early access to an open beta. It was an MMORPG called Our Shoot Curse, and had been made by one of the world's top developers. It had the appearance of a very orthodox fantasy RPG, but it had no concept of levels of professions. However, even with no levels, you still earned experience points. Our protagonist, a young woman, logged in and picked the elf race with the innate trait of beauty. And she quickly noticed that after getting those two features, she had already spent almost half of her XP. She was one of the participants of the closed beta, and she decided to call her character Reare, while saying that the innate trait didn't exist in previous tests. By the way, players received 100 XP when they started, and you could build your character freely with your experience points. Still, she kept reading the text of the status window floating in front of her, and realized that there were traits that increased her XP if she chose them, such as poor sight or albinism, because they worked as debuffs for her character. In the end, after picking the elf race, beauty, and the two debuffs, she ended up with 110 XP available, which pleased her because if she wanted to get ahead of the other players, she would need a lot of experience points. As for the drawbacks, she was planning to manage them with her spawn point. Normally, you had 6 human-controlled countries where you could choose to spawn, but if you chose to place as a goblin or a skeleton, you would immediately face a human subjugation force. So, to prevent that, there was a place where you could spawn outside the human lands, and that was the monster territory. Back with our protagonist, she was inside a cave within the monster territory, saying that if it was there she didn't need to worry about getting sunburned, which was the debuff of the albinism trait. Nevertheless, just as she had thought, she couldn't see too far, courtesy of debuff of the poor sight trait. Moreover, she said that the cave where she was looked like it had been designed for skeletons. She then began to read the long tutorial, and quickly noticed that to the system, the only difference between players and NPCs was whether or not they could receive system messages. Moreover, she also learned that the system didn't differentiate between NPCs and monsters. After learning that, our protagonist said that perhaps that was an attempt to get players to be considerate and avoid killing NPCs indiscriminately. Shortly after, while exploring the cave, she found a group of female demi-humans who were eating something similar to a hot pot. She had been tracking the sound she had previously heard, but contrary to her expectations, the sound was not coming from monsters, but from the girls who were talking. Right after, she wondered why there was a humanoid character in the demon territory, and if those characters were NPCs. However, before she could think of anything else, one of the demi-humans began walking to where our protagonist was, and she began to wonder if that would be too much for her to handle, before realizing that even if that was the case, it couldn't be helped. Shortly after, she took the young female, who just wanted to pee, by surprise, and knocked her out by hitting her in the nape. Of course, that alerted the other female demi-humans, and our protagonist thought that when the enemy was too shaken to move, you should go all out, so immediately thereafter, she charged against the rest of the demi-humans. The demi-humans tried to react, but our protagonist was faster, and hit another one hard on her belly, putting her out of commission. The remaining 2 then tried to counterattack, but they were too slow, and almost immediately our protagonist knocked them out. Afterward, our protagonist said that the martial arts she had learned at home had come in handy at that moment. In fact, it had worked pretty well even as a newbie. Then, while noticing that she had earned 300 XP despite having not killed them, she concluded that those demi-humans were a bunch of small fries, and wondered if they were bandits. Still, she was pleased because despite those demi-humans being small fries, she had ended up getting triple the XP she previously had. Furthermore, she also discovered that it looked like when NPCs died, they didn't spawn again, so she decided to put those NPCs she had knocked down to good use. Sometime later, the female demi-humans began to wake up, and our protagonist quickly introduced herself as an elf called Reare. Right after, she told them that they looked like beast folk, and asked them who was their leader, before adding that she would allow the leader to open her mouth. Almost immediately one of them began to talk, but our protagonist cut her off saying she was being very rude, before asking her if that was how her mom had taught her to speak. Then the demi-human apologized, and said that her parents had never taught them how she should speak. After hearing that, Reare apologized and explained to the demi-humans how she should address her. Afterward, she told her that she wanted to talk a little, before asking her why she was living there. The demi-human then explained that their village was in bad shape, probably due to the expansion of the monster territory. So the adults had decided to sell her and her friends, and that was the reason why they had decided to run away. They had gone to nearby villages to steal, and she even admitted that if the owners of the house noticed them, they killed them. In short, they did everything they could in order to survive. Afterward, when they realized 5 years had passed since they had left the village, they had been roaming in the forest, avoiding the eyes of others, and that morning they had found that cave. While she was hearing the demi-human, our protagonist thought that she had predicted it would be a sad story, and was amazed that a single NPC could have such a rich, detailed story. In fact, she thought that it was hard to believe that so many memories could have been prepared in advance, which made her wonder if that world had been put into operation long before the beta test. In fact, she began to feel that she wasn't playing a game, and considered the possibility of that being another world populated by artificial intelligence. However, she had a pressing matter in front of her, so she decided to stop thinking about the world and focus on the girls first. She then noticed that they seemed to have some talent. After all, they had managed to survive that long, even if they were in such a pitiful state. Plus, she thought that it would be a shame to just kill them off for the sake of XP. So, in the end, she made a decision, and told them that she understood their circumstances, before adding that they had done their best so far. Nevertheless, she then warned them by saying that if they continued doing things the way they had been, one day someone would take everything away from them, which left them speechless. In fact, after seeing their reaction, our protagonist was amazed because it was clear that they had never thought about it. Then, the one who seemed the leader of the group said that they didn't have a place to sleep in any village. After all, they couldn't be near other people since they were bandits and had to steal money. At that moment, our protagonist had an idea and told them that she would teach them how the world and the experience mechanism worked. 5 hours later, Reare was exhausted and couldn't believe it had taken that long to explain to them that. As for the demi-humans, they were happy and commented that our protagonist was very smart, strong, and kind, and that they had never seen anyone like her. However, Reare told them that she was not kind, before adding that she had done it because she had wanted to. After all, she liked explaining things to people. Still, the leader of the group replied that no one had ever taught her things so politely before. Right after, another demi-human said that when she was in the village, she used to get beaten up when she went to ask something she didn't understand. After hearing that, Reare couldn't help but feel touched, and the demi-humans noticed her reaction, so their leader told her that she was really kind-hearted. Immediately thereafter, the 4 girls made a decision, and their leader, whose name was Carrie, begged our protagonist to be their boss. At that moment, the system showed an error message saying that the required skill had not been learned, and that in order to tame Carrie, our protagonist should learn the subordinate skill. Why do I suspect that if our protagonist was a man, that skill's name would be something completely different? Anyway, that message surprised Reare, who didn't know that she could tame an NPC. After all, Carrie and the other were not monsters, but humanoid characters. Our protagonist had been playing since the close beta, and she had never heard of the existence of skills that allowed you to tame, so she wondered if there was a player out there who knew that information. Sadly, the demi-humans took our protagonist's silence as a sign of rejection, but luckily, Reare quickly explained to them that she didn't mind becoming their boss, but she needed to think about something for a little, so she needed to take a little break. At that moment, Reare took Carrie's hands and told her that she looked like she was about to eat. Then, she asked her if she still wanted to do it, but before the other could reply, our protagonist opened the skill tree in the status window, while thinking that it would be great if she was able to tame NPCs. Unfortunately, she couldn't see the subordinate skill anywhere in the skill tree, which led her to think that there should be a hidden condition. She then began to wonder if that skill would show up when she combined skills with similar effects. She even guessed that the skill required for taming was probably inside another skill that allowed you to manipulate your opponent. She then thought of mental magic. After all, in the mental magic tree you would find a control skill after acquiring Stupefy, Charm, and Fear. However, going down the mental magic tree, the control skill costed 150 XP at the very least. Not to mention that another strong possibility was summon and discipline, but there was no skill tree inside either of them. Afterward, she began to consider that if neither of those two paths was the answer, then perhaps she should another approach, since thinking about the word subordinate made her think about necromancy. After all, necromancy had a subordinating effect on souls. The problem with that hypothesis was that necromancy didn't have a skill tree. In the end, she couldn't help but conclude that summon, discipline, and necromancy seemed to be related, but none of them had a skill tree. Still, she decided to test the waters and acquired the 3 of them by expending 60 XP. Unfortunately, nothing else happened, which was somehow within expectations, so she knew that it was not time to panic. Right after, she considered the possibility of the key being mental magic, and decided to give it a try. After all, even if she was wrong, being a specialized mental magician had some uses. She then acquired Stupefy, Charm, Fear, and Control by expending another 150 XP, and almost immediately a hidden skill called Bind Soul appeared inside necromancy, which let her know that the direction she was going was not wrong. After all, unlocking both the mental magic and necromancy skill trees had been the key for that new skill to appear, which confirmed to her that there were conditions to get new skills. She then decided to acquire Bind Soul for 20 XP, which allowed her to steal the soul of a corpse under certain conditions. Moreover, she could use stored souls to make Control usable on undead, homunculus, and golem targets. Right after, Rare said that the key to unlocking what she needed was probably behind another hidden skill, and to confirm her theory, a notification sound was heard, and our protagonist noticed that a new skill called Contract had appeared inside Summon. That skill allowed her to forge a contract with the soul of a successfully summoned target. Besides, undead created with Bind Soul could be added to the contract list. Of course, after reading that, she guessed that the next thing that would unlock would be the skill that she was looking for, so she decided to acquire Contract for 60 XP. Immediately thereafter, a hidden skill called Subordinate appeared inside Discipline. Of course, that made our protagonist feel elated, and almost immediately she decided to acquire that skill for 60 XP. Immediately thereafter, a pop-up window appeared informing Rare that she was now able to tame Carrie, and the system asked our protagonist if she wanted to proceed. She obviously agreed, and shortly after apologized to Carrie for keeping her waiting, while thinking that considering the amount of experience points it took to do that, it was safe to say that she was definitely the only player with that skill at that moment, which in turn made her think that things were getting interesting. Afterward, she proclaimed to Carrie that from that moment onward, she was her underling, which meant that in name and reality, our protagonist was Carrie's boss. Shortly after, the 4 demi-humans followed Rare through the cave. Obviously, the next step was to tame the other 3 demi-humans, and Rare did it very quickly, turning all of them into her subordinates. Immediately thereafter, a pop-up window appeared informing that the named enemy, Mountain Cat Bandit Group, had been defeated, which made our protagonist realize that those kids she had defeated weren't small fries, but unique bosses. Of course, that made Rare guess that the 4 demi-humans should be fairly strong, and she began to wonder if there was a way for her to measure their true strength somehow. However, her thoughts were interrupted by Carrie, who asked her what they were going to do from that moment onward. Sometime later, the 5 girls left the cave, and the demi-humans were elated because after taking a bath their fur was like Rare's, shining and fluffy. At that moment, Carrie asked our protagonist why they had gone hunting, to which one of the cat women replied that our protagonist had already told her that. Carrie then looked like she wasn't sure of that, and Rare thought that that situation happened all the time with that girl. She even wondered if Carrie was dumb, or if it was something related to her stats. She even considered the possibility of raising her INT stat. Nevertheless, at that moment, another Catwoman told the group to stop, before informing them that she could smell wolves and blood, which made the other demi-humans realize that they were pretty close. Rare then asked them if they should take the initiative and ambush them, but Carrie quickly replied that it was fine because they had already found them. Right after, a huge white wolf appeared in front of them. Nevertheless, while our protagonist panicked at the size of the wolf, the Catwomen didn't hesitate, and immediately rushed toward it to fight it. In fact, Rare noticed that the playful mood around them had changed all of a sudden, which confirmed what Carrie had told her before about them having a lot of experience dealing with those types of situations. Carrie was their leader, and was the main attacker and melee fighter. Her main weapon was a sword, and she also acted like some sort of tank. Then it was Remy who used short-range weapons and a bow. She could be both front and rear guard, and had a supporting role for the party. The next one was Riley, who had enhanced vision, and Hawkeye, which helped her see things farther away. She supported everyone with her bow. Finally, it was Marion, who had enhanced smell, and also conceal presence, to disturb the enemy. Shortly after, the battle began, and the 4 cat women showed a strong synergy while dealing with the monster. Unfortunately, after a while, they hadn't been able to launch a successful attack, and our protagonist thought that if they had magical skills, the situation would be different. She then said that she had been anxiously watching that situation unfold, but at that moment she wanted to get into action too. Therefore, she decided to first strengthen her M&D stat with the experience points she had because she needed to test her skills and abilities. Immediately thereafter, she used Stupefy on the wolf, knocking it down and surprising the cat women, but Rare quickly told them to not attack it. Then she used Charm on the monster, and almost immediately she used Control on it. At that moment, she noticed that she couldn't feel any resistance, and right after she used Subordinate on the wolf. Almost immediately, a pop-up window appeared informing her that the taming had been successful, which pleased her. She was very happy because by doing that she confirmed that if she used mental magic successfully, she could control even hostile opponents. At that moment, Carrie praised her because she had dealt with the wolf in an instant, but Rare downplayed that, saying that the cat women had also done their best. Our protagonist then thought that the girls should have earned some experience points too after the battle, but she was disappointed after seeing that they had earned nothing. That made her wonder if she was going to get all the experience points that Carrie and the other girls had earned. Moreover, she also began to analyze how the subordinate skill worked, and guessed that if it collected the experience of her underlings, perhaps it could let her use the XP on them. At that moment, Carrie informed our protagonist that the wolf had hunted a boar, before telling her that she wanted to take the meat back. However, Rare replied that she would pick up all of it, and quickly made the meat disappear in front of Carrie's eyes, which made the Catwoman feel exhilarated. Immediately thereafter, Carrie asked our protagonist how she had done that, and Rare replied that there was something called inventory, which it was a bag that you couldn't see, but you could touch it by some special procedure. Sadly, Carrie didn't understand the explanation, and our protagonist promised that she would teach her properly later while thinking that she had been talking about the gaming system with an NPC. At that moment, the wolf made our protagonist look in a certain direction, and Rare assumed that the place it was pointing out was its home, which looked bigger than her first cave. Nevertheless, the best part came later when they entered the cave, because the wolf introduced its pack to our protagonist, who was elated. After all, there were a lot of wolves. In fact, she ended up praising the wolf, because it was not a lone one, and the wolf seemed very happy with its master's reaction. Right after, another pop-up window appeared informing our protagonist that she could tame all those wolves in one go, which astonished her. Still, she didn't hesitate and did it before welcoming them to her family. Afterwards, she decided to give every one of the wolves a name, and the first one was of course their leader, whom she named Hakuma. As for the rest, they were called Ginka, Mizor, Reare, Fubuki, Yu, Kagome, and Zeraim. She then asked if everyone was there or if there was anyone hiding from her, and right after noticed a big ant that had arrived. She then asked the wolves if the ant was one of their buddies, but they quickly denied it. So she immediately ordered the cat women to catch it. The next moment, Riley shot various arrows to block the escape road of the ant, while Carrie asked our protagonist what she was going to do with the ant, before explaining that it had a hard shell and that they couldn't eat it. After hearing that, Rare thought that she was going to tame it, before thinking that with their abilities and endeavor, she could build a base for herself and enhance their combat effectiveness. Unfortunately, the ant noticed our protagonist was spacing out and threw a fire attack toward her that almost hit it. That scared Rare, especially after seeing how the rock beside her was melted by the attack. Our protagonist then thought that the ant indeed had a hard shell, which made it hard to get close to it. However, she had a plan and decided to use the XP she had gotten from Hakuma to give Marion a new ability. The Catwoman noticed something had changed within her, and almost immediately, our protagonist informed her that she had granted her the power of magic. That shocked Marion, but before she could even react, Carrie warned her that the ant was right behind her. Marion barely had time to turn around and stretch her arms forward, but thanks to that she managed to cast an ice spell right in time to freeze the ant. It seems that Rare also gave her the power of plot armor. Of course, Marion was astonished after realizing not only that she had just cast a spell, but that it had been her boss the one who had granted her that power. And as to make a bigger impression, Reare told the cat women that she had increased their int stat, before asking them what they thought about, and if they were able to get the gist of what our protagonist was trying to accomplish. The cat women began to think really hard, and shortly after Carrie replied that she thought that she had gotten it, which made Reare wonder if she should keep increasing their int stat from that moment onward. Afterward, our protagonist told them that if they worked hard for her, she would give them magic and many other great powers. Of course, they all agreed to it because they wanted to be stronger, and the other three wanted to be able to use magic too. Reare then said that they needed to defrost the ant. She also added that she really wanted to try using Subordinate, but she should have used the XP for someone to get fire magic. At that moment, Carrie intervened and asked if it was really necessary for the ant to be defrosted, before suggesting to our protagonist to test if she was able to use the skill with the ant being frozen. After hearing that, Reare realized that Carrie had really hit the nail on the head and concluded that that was definitely due to improved intelligence. In fact, our protagonist had begun to consider Carrie smarter than her. Of course, Reare also knew that she should be happy that her subordinates were smart, and then she praised Carrie for her suggestion, before saying that she was going to test that theory right away. Unfortunately, when she used the subordinate skill, she got an error message saying that the skill couldn't be activated because the target, infantry ant, had already been tamed by another character. Sure, our protagonist was astonished at first, but then she noticed the amount of information that the message had given to her. First of all, the ant was an infantry ant. Then, if someone had already tamed it, the most logical answer was that it had been an ant queen. Afterward, she told the others that in order to tame that ant, she would have to go deep into that area, before adding that since the place looked small, she would go in alone. Almost immediately, Carrie said that it was dangerous no matter how you looked at it, before suggesting that at the very least, our protagonist needed someone to protect her. Right after, Marion said that she should take her because she could weaken them with her ice magic. Then Remy said that our protagonist should take her because of her enhanced hearing. Afterward, Riley said our protagonist should have as many shields as she could, even though she admitted that her eyes were useless in that situation. Obviously, their reactions embarrassed Reare, but in the end, she couldn't help it, and the four cat women followed her. In fact, Hakuma didn't end up following them because he was too big to fit inside, so our protagonist began to wonder if the fact that she was getting too many opinions was the influence of having increased their int stat. Sometime later, they left the narrow passage and arrived at a big hall. Right after Marion used her skill and told the others that there were many ants nearby, before adding that they were getting closer. After hearing that, Reare told her to prepare her ice magic, and almost immediately a lot of ants appeared before them, which made our protagonist wonder if they had been ambushed by them. Still, she had no intention of letting the ants oppose her, so she decided to attack all at once. Reare used her charmed skill on all the ants, and asked Marion to use her ice magic on them. The next moment, all the ants had been frozen, and our protagonist praised Marion despite trembling due to the cold. Still, Reare asked the other cat women if they had missed anyone, and where was the queen, but the others didn't know the queen's location, and simply suggested walking toward a certain place. However, before they could even take one step, a huge noise could be heard, and almost immediately the ant queen appeared in front of them. The ant queen began to move, and our protagonist wondered what it was going to do. Nevertheless, Reare was not willing to give up her first move, so she immediately cast Stupefying Control on the monster. Unfortunately, shortly after, the system informed her that both skills had failed, which made our protagonist realize that the ant queen was able to resist her mental magic. Right after, she ordered Marion to freeze the monster, and the Catwoman quickly complied. Once the queen was frozen, Reare informed Carrie and the others that her mental magic had a cooldown period, so they would need to buy her some time, which the others agreed without hesitation. Afterward, since that place was big enough, she decided to use Summon to call Hakuma and Ginka, and once the two wolves appeared, she ordered them to hold back the queen. The Catwomen and the wolves began to fight against the queen, and the battle was tough. Luckily, it was soon evident that the monster was being overwhelmed by our protagonist's underlings, and once Rare's mental magic's cooldown finished, she cast Stupefying Control again on the queen, while wondering if the monster would be able to resist them again. Luckily, it looked like the spells had worked that time, but our protagonist knew that the queen was not yet tamed, so she immediately cast Subordinate on the huge ant, and then the system informed her that she had successfully tamed the Vespoid queen. Afterward, our protagonist introduced the ant queen to her underlings as their new colleague. Carrie then asked if the queen had a name, to which Rare replied that her name was Shuguru since Vespoid Queen was too long. At that moment, Rare also noticed that she had gotten control of the other ants too, but she was interrupted by Carrie, who asked her to teach them about the inventory as a reward for having helped her, which surprised Rare because the other had actually remembered that promise. The elf then asked them to imagine an invisible bag in front of them, before showing them the motion required to move things in and out of it. Sadly, Carrie was not able to use it, and our protagonist guessed that using that skill was impossible for an NPC. Nevertheless, Rare's thoughts were interrupted again, that time by Hakuma, who had been able to use the inventory skill. Even Marion was using it too, and that really left our protagonist flabbergasted. After all, she believed that the inventory feature was only available for players, but she then recalled the system message from before that said that the only difference between players and NPCs was whether or not they could receive system messages. Right after, Rare began to wonder if that meant that both NPCs and even monsters could use the inventory feature. Meanwhile, Carrie and Remy didn't look okay, because the former didn't even know what they were talking about anymore, and the latter felt frustrated because she didn't know if she understood that mechanic or not. As for Rare, she thought that both Hakuma and Marion had been able to use the inventory immediately after her explanation, which made our protagonist assume that it wasn't very difficult to do it. However, that rose another question: if that was easy to do, why the other cat women weren't able to use it? Rare then began to wonder what was the difference between them and the other two, and after reaching to a conclusion, she decided to test her theory right away. Afterwards, she called Carrie and told her to get closer, and once the other was near our protagonist, she apologized because after all the explanations, she still wasn't able to use the inventory. Nevertheless, Rare dismissed that and told her that she was going to help her a little bit. Immediately thereafter, our protagonist increased Carrie's IND stat and asked her to try to use the inventory again. The Catwoman complied and was elated after realizing that she was finally able to do it. As for our protagonist, that test confirmed to her that the requirement for NPCs to be able to use inventory was a high INT stat. Obviously, to further confirm it, she increased that stat for both Remy and Riley, and shortly after both Catwomen were also able to use the inventory, which pleased them a lot. Furthermore, that new test confirmed another thing to Rare. NPCs could all teach each other, since the one who had taught Remy and Riley how to use the inventory had been Carrie. Right after, our protagonist asked Carrie to teach Shuguru how to do it. Shortly after, Carrie told Rare that she had been able to teach the Ant Queen how to use the inventory, but she added that interacting with her had been challenging since the Queen couldn't speak. By the way, Shuguru very quickly began to use the feature too. After hearing that, Rare realized that it would be inconvenient if they couldn't communicate properly, and Carrie asked her boss if they had something they could use to overcome that limitation. Our protagonist then thought that perhaps telepathy could be useful, but then it hit her. If the NPCs were able to use the inventory feature, then perhaps they would also be able to use the friend chat feature. So Rare decided to immediately test that theory by asking Shuguru if she could add her to her friends list. The problem was that the ant didn't understand her command, which in turn made Rare realize she didn't know how to add someone to her friend list. After all, she hadn't met a single player since she had started. Luckily, the game had a tutorial for that, and she quickly consulted it. To add a friend, you needed a friend's card. In short, you had to take a friend's card from your inventory and give it to the person you would like to add. Afterward, the other person would store your card in their inventory, and with that, the registration process was complete. Right after, our protagonist took a friend's card from her inventory and gave it to Shuguru while asking her to put it in her own inventory. The Queen quickly did it, and almost immediately, Rare could hear a female voice screaming, which surprised her. By the way, that voice was desperately asking her if the process had been successful. At the same time, the system showed her a message confirming that she had become friends with Shuguru. Our protagonist then praised the Queen for having used the friend chat right away, before adding that from that moment onward, no matter how far apart they were, they could still talk. Not to mention that that feature was perfect for discussing topics in secret. At that moment, Rare thought that you could really do anything in that game and couldn't help but be amazed that you were able to have that level of freedom with NPCs. Then she wondered if you were able to tame other players as well. Of course, just the thought of that made our protagonist feel elated, because if she could tame players, then she would be able to get all the experience points they earned for herself. It was as if the game was encouraging her to use the princess play approach and rely on those around her to advance in the game. Obviously, that was something that needed to be checked. But unfortunately, she didn't know any players. Still, in the end, she decided that it didn't matter. After all, if she increased the INT stat of her NPCs, they would be much more effective than a bad player. In fact, she began to embrace the idea of raising the 4 cat women into the 4 wise heavenly kings. Nevertheless, for that, she needed experience points, lots of them, but at that moment she was able to also use Shuguru's subordinates. So, she planned to make Shuguru produce more ants, so she could increase the number of subordinates in order to speed up the XP farming process. In fact, she was even planning to take control of the entire forest to build a base. In the meantime, in the town of Urfarin, in the kingdom of Hears, a young man was walking down the streets while saying that the official launch was in 2 days, and that he had already managed to replace his initial equipment. That guy was sure that there would be a big commemorative event on the day of the service launch, and he was aware that depending on the scale of the event, he might not be able to make it alone. Afterward, the young man, whose player's name was Wayne, and who was a closed beta participant too, said that he perhaps should find a colleague to play with. He then entered the mercenary base, and the man in charge quickly called him, before asking him if he was a safe holder, which surprised the guy. However, the man in charge ignored the other's reaction, and said that safe holders tended to hang out with other safe holders, which was why he had thought it was unusual for Wayne to be alone. As for Wayne, he was wondering if by safe holders the other man meant people who could use the inventory. The man also said that the previous day there was another safe holder, and he pointed out that it was a woman who also worked alone. After hearing that, Wayne assumed that if she was using the inventory, she was a player without a doubt, which in turn made him realize that there were other solo players in that region. Almost immediately, the man in charge pulled Wayne out of his reverie by saying that being a mercenary was a very dangerous business. So 2 men were better than 1, and 3 were better than 2. Then someone else entered, and the man in charge quickly identified her as the woman from before, the beast folk girl called Carrie. Right after, she got closer, and while pulling out a small monster from her inventory, she asked the man in charge to take care of it. Meanwhile, Wayne was analyzing her, and noticed that she was using the starting equipment, which made him think that she might have invested most of her earnings in her weapon. After all, that was a very typical behavior of a player, not something an NPC would do. Right after, he asked her if she was a player, before introducing himself as a player called Wayne. Carrie then, while acting as if everything was normal, replied that she was also a player whose name was Reare. 2 days passed, and the day of the official launch arrived, and to celebrate the service launch, the developers said that they were planning to hold a large-scale event. As for the details, they would be announced on the official website at a later date. Meanwhile, Carrie and Wayne were running through a forest hunting ants, but after a while, the cat woman apologized to him for having made him come along with her for her herb gathering, to which he quickly replied that he didn't mind. The guy also said that he was in need of some stuff for the upcoming event, but Carrie didn't know what he was talking about, so he told her that there would be a big event to celebrate the official service launch, before asking her if she had received the announcement. At first, the cat woman had no idea of what he was talking about, but she quickly regained her composure and managed to play along without arousing any suspicions. In fact, Wayne ended up inviting her to join the event together with him. Unfortunately, she couldn't give him an answer right away, because it was a bit difficult for her to decide out of the blue like that, and of course that answer made him feel sad, which in turn made Carrie feel embarrassed. Still, he asked her to think about it, to which she agreed. What he didn't know was that our protagonist was overhearing their entire conversation from a throne where she was sitting. In fact, after a while, Reare concluded that Carrie seemed to be blending in well with the other players. Our protagonist had recently acquired 2 skills called Summon Hearing and Summon Vision that allowed her to make her followers share their senses with her. Reare was using those skills with Carrie at that moment because she had asked her to gather information in a nearby town. Of course, our protagonist didn't fail to notice that other players distinguished between players and NPCs based on whether or not they could use the inventory. At that moment, Shuguru asked our protagonist if Carrie using the inventory would not reveal that NPCs could also use it, to which Reare replied that it was not a big deal, because there was almost no difference in appearance between a player and an NPC. The only way they would know Carrie was an NPC was if she shared the same name as another player, because that game didn't allow players to have the same name. So, if she used another player's name, it would raise suspicions, but the cat woman was calling herself Reare, which meant that other players would never find out unless our protagonist went public, Right after, the Ant Queen gave Reare the regular report from the patrol, while saying that all squads were reporting that there were no issues, to which our protagonist replied by telling Suguru to stay alert. Reare had successfully taken control of that large forest in the previous week, and she was planning to use the ants to expand the underground space and build up a base of operations. In the meantime, on the surface, she would remove obstacles such as other monsters and humans that they encountered. Furthermore, the ants' surveillance network allowed them to keep track of the activity in the forest at all times. Not to mention that due to the ants' hard work, they had procured a massive amount of experience points, so she had been able to acquire a lot of skills, such as summon vision and summon hearing. At that moment, there was nothing that could stand against her in that forest. However, she was not too keen on the idea of going to a large-scale event. Right after, our protagonist's thoughts were interrupted by Riley, who reported that they were facing a hostile opponent, before adding that an army of skeletons had come out of nowhere. Of course, that shocked Reare, because those skeletons had slipped through the ants, which was confirmed by Suguru, who said that she hadn't received any reports from her followers. Our protagonist then considered the possibility of the skeletons appearing out of the blue, but her thoughts were again interrupted by Riley, who asked her what they should do. Right after, Reare ordered the Catwoman to lead the ants to stall the skeletons, so they didn't cause any damage, before adding that she would join her there soon. After all, an army of skeletons would be a great addition, so she couldn't help but say that the timing had been perfect. A while later, Reare joined Riley and apologized to the Catwoman for keeping her waiting, before telling everyone to get out of the way since she wanted to try a new skill on those undead. Immediately thereafter, she cast a skill called Necromantic Barrier that trapped all the skeletons and put them under our protagonist's control. In fact, Reare was surprised with the results. After all, even though it was only for the undead, she could really exert control over a wide area. Right after, she ordered the skeletons to line up and command the ants to attack them with fireballs. Almost immediately a big explosion occurred, and Reare noticed something that made her realize that she had missed someone. Shortly after, the smoke caused by the explosion dissipated, and a skeleton knight could be seen holding a sword. In fact, the skeleton knight yelled at Reare, saying that he would never forgive her for what she had done to them. The skeleton knight even began to say some things about a king which confused our protagonist, but in the end, the monster proclaimed that he could make sure that all of them paid for it. As for Reare, she told her that she had no idea about what had happened to the Night's King, but she had noticed that he had a grudge. Immediately thereafter, our protagonist apologized for defeating the Knight's followers without discussing it first, and then she offered the Knight to talk things over. But the Skeleton Knight wasn't willing to talk, and decided to charge at her. Nevertheless, before he could even get closer, the Skeleton Knight was surrounded by a huge group of ants. Afterward, Reare told her that he looked like a strong person, but even he should know that he couldn't take on all the ants. Our protagonist then gave him 3 options. The first one was allowing him to get out of the forest. The second one was allowing him to become one of her followers, in which case she would give him power, and she would even help him get revenge on his enemy. As for the third one, it was being destroyed right there and then. Shortly after, the knight made his choice, and our protagonist let him know that she was glad, because he had understood quickly. Meanwhile, a pop-up window appeared informing her that the named enemy, D's of Resentment, could be tamed. Afterward, she told everybody that she should retreat before the dawn broke. Meanwhile, the system was running various commands to prepare the large-scale event of the game. Nevertheless, the AI quickly found an error and was unable to run the program. It appeared that some event characters were not available for the assignment, and the AI asked the section leaders to confer to formulate a response. A few days later, the day of the large-scale event finally arrived, and Carrie was discussing with Marion that our protagonist had said that the plans had changed, and she had decided to participate in it. The latter then said that she wondered if Reare would be okay without them going with her, to which the former replied that she would be fine because Kinzaki and Yoroizaka were with her. Meanwhile, inside what looked like a huge coliseum, the announcer informed the crowd that they would hold a battle royale among players. The participating players would be first divided into 32 blocks to compete in the qualifying rounds. Afterward, the 32 players who survived in the qualifying blocks would compete in the finals. Obviously, the winner would receive a wonderful prize. Sometime later, in the qualifying round block 16, some players were battling against a fully armored knight, but they didn't stand a chance. In fact, shortly after, an archer realized that the knight was simply toying with them, and almost immediately, the few remaining players decided to run away. Unfortunately, the knight quickly caught up with them and killed them, while saying that even though it was the right call to flee when you realize you couldn't win, it didn't matter where they went, because they would taste the power of her newest subordinates Kenzaki and Yorizaka, which confirmed that the knight was Reare. Reare heard that Block 16 had completed its qualifying round, and thought that she had finished too fast, but then she told to herself that she shouldn't bother with that, since that was just a qualifying round. She was then informed that everyone would be teleported to the spectator area, where they should wait for a moment, as the finals would begin shortly. Once she reappeared in the arena, the crowd began to wonder who was the Black Knight who had rampaged across Block 16. Not to mention the fact that they couldn't understand how that person had been able to buy full body armor in only 2 weeks. In comparison, the majority of the players had barely managed to buy a few things to replace their starting equipment. In fact, some players had begun to assume that that knight was an event boss prepared by the game staff. As for Reare, she was cursing because she had just wanted to test Yorizaka's and Kenzaki's abilities, but because of that, all the players' eyes were on her. A flashback then starts showing the skeleton knight asking our protagonist what she was doing, to which she replied that, since she still had some XP left even after strengthening all of their stats, she was doing some experiments to see if she could create a homunculus, a life form created through alchemy, and one of the starting races you could choose to play with. In order to do that, she was using the philosopher's egg and Athener, because both were necessary to activate magnum opus, which amplified the effects of each skill in the alchemy tree. She had thought that since Shugaru was creating new NPCs with her haplodiploidy skill, perhaps there was a way for our protagonist to create NPCs with a skill. Of course, she had gotten as many skills in the alchemy tree as she could beforehand, but the homunculus recipe instructions were very vague. Even the list of required ingredients was still hidden. Because of that, she had changed her plans and was testing a recipe where she knew the ingredients. She then began to check the ingredients of a recipe with an unknown name and quickly found a problem. Even though she had a lump of metal, she had no idea of what the first ingredient was, something called Knight's Grudge. Nevertheless, since they had picked up a few things from the graveyard where D's had been found, she decided to try using a rusty armor and a sword. As for the lump of metal, she decided to use an ore that had been mined in their base. By the way, that was one of the best ores she had. Immediately thereafter, she used magnum opus, and the black armor appeared in front of her, along with 4 floating swords. Of course, she quickly noticed that the appearance of the armor had changed, and said that it didn't look like a simple weapon. Right after, she decided to use Subordinate on it to see if she could learn anything new. Thanks to that, she discovered that they were 4 living weapons and 1 living armor. Moreover, she had managed to successfully tame them. At that moment, she decided to name them. For the swords' names, she decided to go from Kenzaki Ichiro to Kenzaki Goro, and for the armor's name, she decided to go with Yoroizake. Back to the present, our protagonist guessed that she hadn't gotten to see the full extent of Yoroizaka's power in the qualifying round, but before she could think of anything else, it was announced that the finals were about to begin, and because of that, the participants would be teleported in 30 seconds. After hearing that, she thought that she was sure that there would be some players worth fighting in the finals, which was why she was looking forward to seeing who was the toughest player. One of the other players who was also participating in the finals had an interesting story. It was the story of a man who used to get sick a lot in his childhood. He was always under the care of an AI nurse at the VR clinic, and because of that, he became obsessed with nurses. He loved them so much that he always went with nurse outfits when it was available in the game. Eventually, a rumor started circulating saying that no one was ever able to stain his nurse uniform, and in his honor, people started calling him Nurse Yoichi. That player appeared in a grasslands and quickly used his skill, Eagle's Eye, to determine that there was a forest ahead, and if he followed that direction, there was a lake. He then decided to hide in the forest and wait for his next prey, but at that moment he noticed someone. Right after, A man wearing a ninja-like outfit appeared and praised Yoichi for being able to notice him even when he was not that close, which meant that the rumors around the nurse guy were true. However, Yoichi quickly replied that the rumors about his achievements in that game had been blown out of proportion. Still, the ninja guy said that he had heard all about Nurse Yoichi, before adding that he was a famous archer who was always wearing a nurse's uniform. Besides, since Yoichi had been able to detect the ninja guy's presence, he concluded that there might be some truth to the rumors. After hearing that, Yoichi smiled and said that he considered himself a very devoted and stoic archer, before adding that a scout like the ninja guy wouldn't be able to penetrate his defenses so easily. Those words hit a nerve on the ninja guy since he got really pissed, and said that Yoichi was the exact opposite of stoic, before yelling at the nurse guy that he should check the definition of stoic in the dictionary. Unfortunately, before they could continue their bantering, they were both insta-killed at the same time by our protagonist, who couldn't understand what those perverts were trying to do. In fact, she admitted to herself that she had killed them on impulse because looking at them was too much for her. She then thought that, in truth, the ninja guy hadn't bothered her, but the nurse guy was just too much. Especially because, thanks to Yoroizaka sharing her vision with her, Rare could see even the hair on the guy's legs despite her supposed poor eyesight. In the end, she decided to get that memory out of her brain right away. Immediately thereafter, our protagonist felt something, and then she received a powerful attack that created a huge explosion. Luckily, she didn't take any damage, and was able to determine that there were various players aiming at her from the woods. She then concluded that since chasing each one of them would be troublesome, it was better to burn everything down with her Hellflame skill. That skill created a huge fire in the woods, but the players managed to withstand it, thanks to a female mage who managed to protect them. Still, she admitted that, if they had been any closer, they would have died for sure. Right after, another player said that he had thought the black armor guy was specialized in close combat, but they had just found the hard way that he was actually a mage. The worst part was that our protagonist didn't plan to let them catch their breath, so she quickly got closer to finish them. At that moment, the other players decided to join forces and face the Black Knight together, since they had realized he was the most dangerous player and probably the most powerful one too. Right after, they threw various spells at Rare, but quickly realized that their magic didn't work on her. Immediately thereafter, they decided to change the strategy and charge in order to take the fight into a close combat one. Sadly, shortly after, they began to feel despair after confirming that swords and axes didn't work on her either. That armor was just too much for them. Unfortunately, Rare decided to speed things up and, with her hands, killed 2 of her opponents by crushing their heads, which frightened the rest of the members of the party. At that moment, one of the remaining male players said that the Black Knight was just too much, before wondering who could possibly win against someone like him. Almost immediately, Rare killed the 2 remaining players, and the announcer declared that the finals were over, naming Rare as the winner, which made her realize that she had killed everybody. Okay, this is taking the OPMC trope to the extreme, and is cool. In fact, the battle had ended so quickly that, before our protagonist could react, she received a message from the game staff requesting her participation in an exhibition match, which, of course, startled her. Meanwhile, Wayne was complaining because he had gotten beaten very easily in the qualifying round. Then, he wondered if Rare had joined the event, because he hadn't seen her since the day he had invited her. Not to mention that he couldn't contact her, because they were not registered as friends. It was then that he heard the announcer saying that the first event was over, and that the winner was the player called Rare, which, of course, astonished him. He couldn't believe that it had been announced that Rare had won, especially because she previously couldn't even beat a few ants by herself. Immediately thereafter, the announcer said that thanks to an agreement with Rare, they would start an exhibition match. In fact, everyone was free to participate. The rules would be the same as in the previous Battle Royale, but if they managed to defeat Rare, they would receive a special prize. Obviously, that fired up a lot of players who speculated that the special prize would be a rare item, so a lot of them decided that it was payback time. As for Wayne, he was still digesting what he had just heard. Shortly after, at the exhibition match special field, Wayne met with the party that was defeated by our protagonist to win the previous event, and one of the players asked the young guy if he was also targeting Reare. Wayne didn't reply, and instead asked them if they were targeting him, which they quickly confirmed. Despite being another battle royale, their target was Reare. Okay, who is going to tell them that story about the frog and the well? In fact, they asked him to join hands with them in order to beat the final boss. Hearing how Reare was considered a final boss surprised Wayne. But before he could say anything, they reached the end of the forest, and once they left the woods, they could see tons of players doing their very best to defeat the Black Knight. In fact, they were even trying to coordinate their efforts in order to be more efficient, so they began to take into account the cooldown time of the players' skills. In fact, Nurse Yoichi volunteered to buy time for the mages since he didn't need to use skills for that. On the other hand, the ninja guy tried to approach Reare, but he quickly realized that it was a difficult thing to do, thanks to the flying swords that kept getting in his way. It was then that Wayne decided to get as close as he could in order to talk to Reare, and ask her if she was really the winner. That managed to distract our protagonist for a second, and that opening was used for several players to attack her, bypassing the flying swords. However, the armor managed to withstand the damage easily, and right after, she cast a huge AoE water spell that killed all the players, Wayne included, of course. Immediately thereafter, the announcer said that the exhibition match was over, and informed everyone that the winner was Reare. Afterward, some players said that the Black Knight was a tough nut to crack. After all, everyone had been wiped out in an instant. In fact, other players kept saying that the Black Knight might actually be a raid boss created by the game staff. Meanwhile, Wayne was close to them, trying to understand how he had died. But his thoughts were interrupted by the man from the party who had talked to him during the exhibition match. The man asked him if the winner was his friend, since he had tried to talk to him during the battle. Wayne then replied that they had just happened to hunt together sometimes, before adding that as far as he knew, she wasn't that strong before. After hearing that, the other man smiled and concluded that there was some kind of shortcut to getting strong really fast. Right after, he asked Wayne if he wanted to add him as a friend, and the other agreed. Immediately thereafter, the man introduced himself as Gilgamesh, before saying that he had tried to get Gilgamesh, but some bastard had taken it before him. After hearing that, Wayne realized something. If he hadn't added him as a friend, he would have never known his real name. Right after, the announcer informed everyone that the first event was over, before thanking all the players who had taken part in it. A few days later, Reare received a message from the game staff. They thanked her because, with her support, the first event had gone much better than expected. Then, they asked her permission to use her battle scenes in their promotional video that would be released to the public. After reading that, she began to ponder over it, and concluded that since her face had been hidden the whole time, she didn't think that would be a problem. At that moment, Deez appeared, and told her that she had been grinning a lot in recent times, to which she replied that many things had happened. It was then that she noticed that Carrie was again feeling bad. In fact, she hadn't looked well in recent days. After hearing that, Deez said that she hadn't been in good shape since she had started seeing the guy named Wayne. Our protagonist then recalled that she wanted to gather information by making Carrie pretend to be a weak player, but it looked like attacking her fellow ants had really stressed her. Right after, she also recalled that, in the exhibition event, he had thought that she was Carrie, and had started to call out her name. In the end, Reare concluded that if Carrie continued to meet with Wayne, she might leak information that he couldn't be allowed to have. So, she quickly made a decision, and told Carrie that she would have to have another meeting with Wayne, since it was time to say goodbye to him. Some time later, Carrie met with Wayne, who told her that he had been worried about her, because it had been a while since the last time they saw each other. After hearing that, the young lady apologized, and explained that she had been busy in real life. Those words startled him, but before he could say anything, She asked him what he wanted to ask her. After hearing that, he began to notice that Carrie's demeanor was different from the Carrie he knew, and he told her that she really knew how to walk in the woods. Carrie then replied that it had been 2 weeks since they had hunted together, so that much was a given. She had gotten used to that place. At that moment, he was really feeling uncomfortable with the way she was talking to him, and he asked her why she was talking so weirdly, before adding that she had never talked to him like that before. After hearing that, Carrie smiled amused and replied that she was role-playing. After all, it was not weird to do that in an MMORPG. In fact, she even asked him to give her a break. Still, he was not convinced and asked her if she was really rare, to which she replied that she indeed was rare. Wayne then told her that he had a feeling that she was not the Rare he knew, which surprised and annoyed the Catwoman. Still, she didn't lose her composure and asked him what he was talking about, before explaining to him that the game checked the brainwaves first, before allowing you to log in. So there was no way what he was talking about could happen. Speaking of plot armor that came out of nowhere. Come on, author, at least stop being so obvious. Nevertheless, Wayne was not convinced and said that Rare was not used to talking in technical terms. At least that was what he had gotten from their past conversations, which meant that the Rare in front of him was behaving completely out of character. It was then that our protagonist, who was using a new skill called Summon Caster Mind, that allowed her to possess Carrie's body, realized that she might have screwed up. Oh boy, the plot armor and the author's love are strong with this one. She then thought that she had tried to be careful and avoid any strange movements because there was a difference between her original body and Carrie's, but in the end she had let her guard down. Right after, she was pulled out of her reverie by the young man who told her that Rare used to talk to someone using the friend chat, before asking if that other person was the one in front of him at that moment. Okay, this Wayne is not stupid, I will give him that. He then added that she had called herself Rare, but perhaps her real name was never Rare. After all, they had never exchanged friend cards, so there was no way he could verify her real name. Right after, he pointed his finger at her, before saying that the real Rare was the one standing in front of him at that moment, which made our protagonist very excited because she had never expected an MMORPG to let her taste being a cornered criminal in a mystery series. She even praised Wayne for being sharp. Our protagonist then asked him if that was his theory, but before he could reply, she quickly added that she hadn't expected that there were 2 players with the same appearance, one of them being her, and the other one being the Rare he had met before. After hearing that, he said that he had pretty much guessed that, which meant that he had been right all along. What he didn't know was that he had activated our protagonist's trap card. By pretending that she had just confessed, she had managed to trick him into thinking that there were 2 players with the same appearance. So, as long as he didn't know that NPCs could use the inventory and friend chat and that her real appearance remained hidden, she was sure that she wouldn't have any problems. Right after, he interrupted her thoughts by asking her why she had done that, and she replied that no reason in particular, although if she had to give a reason, she just wanted to PK. She then recalled that when she was a closed beta tester, she had pretended to be an NPC to lure stupid players, just so she could kill them later. Again, Wayne interrupted her thoughts, trying to confirm if she had really pretended to be an NPC to PK, and she had no issues confirming that. Our protagonist even took her time to explain that it was a great strategy that she had used a bunch of times, before adding that unfortunately, if she used it again in the same city, other players would figure it out, which had made her move to other towns. What she didn't know was that he had been one of those stupid players that she had killed back then, and that didn't please him at all. Not to mention that Rare was truly flabbergasted when he revealed that to her. Still, she quickly regained her composure, and began to laugh out loud, mocking Wayne by saying that it had been hilarious to see how stupid he was as a player. Still, she also praised his growth for having managed to corner her like he had done. At that moment, he yelled at her, asking why she hadn't lured him herself, considering that both of them looked the same, to which our protagonist replied that he had thought he might guess the reason from their conversation. She then explained that she was not good at luring people, but Carrie, on the other hand, had a pure and open personality, which was more effective in luring people. After all, he was hopelessly attracted to her. Reare then added that that forest was a great place to gain experience, which was why she had set up her base of operations there. Moreover, since it was much more efficient to gain experience by killing other players, she was planning to PK as many players as she could. After hearing that, Wayne went mad and told her that if she was planning to kill more players, he was not going to let her get away with that. However, she simply teased him by asking him what he was going to do about it. She even invited him to call his gang to beat her up, because that worked great for her too. Immediately thereafter, she drew her sword while telling him that it was time for them to part ways. Wayne then focused on her sword, and quickly recognized it as one of the floating swords of the Black Knight, which made him take a defensive stance. Unfortunately, before he could even manage to draw his sword, our protagonist charged at him with an insane speed, before insta-killing him. Afterward, Reare woke up in her throne, but, before she could decide her next course of action, considering that Wayne was out of the way, she received a message from management, which made her think that it might be related to the promotional video. However, after she read its content, she showed an evil grin while saying that she had come up with an amazing idea. Yeah, we know that you are evil. Shortly after, the promotional video was released, inviting players to experience a realistic adventure on a magnificent continent where they could encounter NPCs and monsters with embedded high-performance AI and collect and freely utilize their experience points. Moreover, they could also experience realistic conversations and battles, not to mention the game's reincarnation system, which allowed players to change classes. In short, endless possibilities await those who decided to join the game. After all, as long as you had experience points, you could quickly grow. Sometime later, a party of players was doing some hunting when one of them said that, like the rumors said, you could get quite a bit of experience there, to which other player added that that forest was the hottest thing at the moment. Right after, a third player asked why there were only ants there, but before he could get an answer, they noticed that there was another treasure box nearby. Shortly after, they opened it and found a sword that looked powerful, and one of the players told the one who had grabbed the sword that at that rate, he would be able to replace his entire set very soon. Unfortunately, before they could get the rest of the items from the treasure box, they were ambushed by a skeleton soldier. However, they managed to avoid the attack and almost immediately began to counterattack, thinking that the boss had finally shown up. In fact, the one who had just gotten the new sword was eager to test how sharp it was on the skeleton. Sadly, the skeleton insta-killed him with ease, which astonished the other players. Nevertheless, the problems didn't end there. The remaining players quickly realized that the skeleton was not a boss because two more appeared, surrounding them. What they didn't know was that our protagonist was surveilling everything by using an owl as a conduit. She was sitting on her throne, and said that, as she had thought, the players would get bored if she only gave them ants to hunt. After hearing that, Carrie, who was standing beside the throne, pointed out that the players were not able to handle other monsters. After all, they had been crushed in an instant when the skeletons appeared. Reare then lamented that she might have made her subordinates too powerful. Right after, Riley praised our protagonist for her abilities, before adding that she didn't know it was so easy to lure players into their base. However, Reare quickly replied that there was no way all of them would be there, just because of her. Our protagonist then thought that Wayne had done exactly what she wanted him to do. So, after they had parted ways, one after another, the players were exploring her base, the Great Leafy Forest. In fact, at that moment, the players were treating that forest like a dungeon. Riley then asked our protagonist if the system had worked well, to which Reare replied that it seemed it had worked out perfectly. Our protagonist then recalled that when she was contacted by the game's management, because they wanted to use her gameplay from the official event to make a promotional video, she had asked them to give the impression that the winner was hiding away to make the character drastically stronger, because she knew that that would cause rumors about her to spread. Furthermore, Wayne had also been going around saying that she had killed him while spreading what he knew about her on the public forums, and his posts had added some credibility to the rumors. So, in search of a secret way to become stronger, many players had begun to flood into the forest. Afterward, she came up with a plan, and decided to turn that forest into a pseudo-dungeon. She had given low-tier metals, collected from the mines to the engineer ants to make weapons and other equipment. Then they had scattered the weapons throughout the great forest. Afterward, a player would find those weapons, and the pseudo-dungeon was complete. At that moment, Suguru asked her if she liked the current disposition of their subordinates in that area, to which Reare replied that she didn't see any problems, because if it was too difficult, people would give up quickly. After all, the game had a penalty for those who died. Our protagonist then asked the Ant Queen if she could keep the difficulty level around where it was at that moment, and the other immediately replied that she could. Reare then thought that while some players would get some experience and loot, she would gain a lot of experience by having her subordinates kill them, which was an amazing win-win situation. Right after, she said that that situation was going to attract more players to the forest over time. It was then that she realized that she had just turned the game into a dungeon keeper simulator, and said that it looked like she had taken the game in a weird direction. However, she had acquired a large amount of experience points thanks to the advertisements, so she decided to keep going down that path and see where it led. After hearing that, Carrie asked her if she had become the final boss of that forest, to which our protagonist replied that if she was the final boss, then she needed to surprise the players who would arrive to defeat her, which meant that she would need an ace or two up her sleeve. Unfortunately, Carrie didn't get what our protagonist meant, and suggested that she should use a knife since they wouldn't notice she had one. Right after, Reare told her that there was something that she had been thinking about. The class change reincarnation system. As the name implied, it was a system that allowed you to change to a different race if you met certain conditions. For example, it looked like when you became a vampire's subordinate, you could reincarnate as a squire zombie. After hearing that, Carrie asked her if our protagonist wanted them to capture a vampire, to which Reare replied that she was sure there were other ways to reincarnate. In fact, there was one thing she had her eyes on, the Philosopher's Stone, the Holy Grail of alchemy. That stone had many legends, such as giving immortality, turning lead into gold, and other things, so she said that it would be great if they could use it to reincarnate into another race. Immediately thereafter, Carrie said that they should search for it, but Reare replied that that was not necessary because those stones didn't exist in nature to begin with. It was because of it that she had decided to create one at that very moment. Of course, that surprised both Carrie and Riley, but our protagonist explained to them that she had the alchemy skill, so she was sure that she would be able to create one. Well, she has the author's powers, so I have no doubts she is going to succeed at that. Reare was planning to use the skill she had previously used to create Yoroi Zaka and Kenzaki, magnum opus. After all, she had already proven that, as long as you knew the ingredients in the recipe, you could use the skill even if the name of the resulting alchemy was locked. Besides, she had found something interesting while she was looking at some of the recipes that she could make. There had been several philosopher's stones throughout history, and she had found the closest thing to a recipe for it. She had compared the ingredients of several recipes, and had guessed that the unknown ingredient was probably something related to potassium carbonate, in other words, ashes. Moreover, the ingredient was unlocked after you came in contact with it once. Unfortunately, if it was just ashes, she had been in contact with some when she set the forest ablaze during the event, so she thought that perhaps what she needed were ashes made from a special material. She then said that she had collected all the materials she could find in the forest, before wondering out loud what kind of material it could be, the one she was looking for. At that moment, Marion made contact telepathically, saying that it was time for her regular report, and Reare asked her how things were going on her side. Then, after hearing her reply, our protagonist showed a grin, before telling her that she would be there soon. Shortly after she appeared, along with Dees and Carrie, where Marion and the Ice Wolf Ginka were. Right after, Marion thanked Reare for answering her call, and Ginka added that it was wonderful to see her after such a long time. Dees then asked Reare where they were, and our protagonist gave him the map she had won after winning the recent event, a map of the surroundings of the kingdom of Hears. Thanks to that, they determined that they were in a place called the Tale Forest, which was the northern neighbor of the Great Libby Forest where they lived. The skeleton knight then asked why they had gone there, to which she replied that since she had collected all the different types of materials she could get in the Great Lieb Forest, she had asked Marion and Ginka to scout other places to see if they could find new materials. Right after, she said that it finally looked like she was playing an RPG, since she was going to search for new materials in an unexplored area with a party. Immediately afterward, Dees summoned various skeleton soldiers and asked Reare to let them be the vanguard because he wouldn't allow his princess to be killed by any happenstance. With Dees and his skeletons as a vanguard, Rare's party began exploring the new forest. Then, a while later, the skeleton knight reported to our protagonist that he had spotted some enemies, before adding that it seemed that the only creatures in that forest were undead. Moreover, judging by their armor, they might be Dees' former comrades. After hearing that, Reare confirmed that there were undead like Dees in that forest too. She then asked if perhaps there was also a massive outbreak there. She even considered the possibility that perhaps both the Tale Forest and the Great Libby Forest were places meant to spawn strong monsters. She even thought that perhaps Sugaru and Dees were designated as raid boss candidates for the Great Libby Forest, and on their way to becoming bosses, they would fight each other, and the winner would eventually rule the forest. Perhaps that was the original scenario, but she had made both of them her subordinates through a stroke of luck. Reare then considered another possibility. If there were more undead like Dees in that forest, there should have been a power struggle in that place as well. So, if there were only undead there, it might mean that the undead side had won the war in the Tale Forest. However, that was unfortunate. At that moment, Dees interrupted her thoughts, and told her that he had understood that she wished to subjugate the boss there and add them to her ranks, to which she replied that that was part of it. Nevertheless, she also wanted some weak monsters other than ants in her dungeon. Right after, she explained that if they defeated them normally, they would turn into drops, but if they could bring the boss leading those undead to their side, they could gain an entire undead army. Then she asked Dees if he wanted to present that undead army to her, to which he replied that he would do it. Nevertheless, after a while wandering through the forest, Reare began to feel bored. They were moving around while avoiding the undead to keep them alive for later use, but without any battles. There was not much for her to do. In fact, she again began to wonder if her subordinates might be too efficient. Up to that point, she had been playing the game by going with the flow. But Carrie and Dees were fighting monsters well enough without her, and Sugaru was handling the management of the dungeon just fine. Well, it seemed our dear protagonist is not needed, so it is time for her to return to real life and touch grass. Anyway, over the past few days, she had felt like she had been becoming less active, including that day. However, it was not like she was missing doing anything specific. At that moment, she felt the sunlight and began to feel uncomfortable due to her trait, albinism, that made her sensitive to sunlight, and she began to wonder how far that forest extended. Right after, they were attacked by the trees surrounding them, which took them by surprise, especially because they could unroot themselves from the floor and move. Still, what caught the attention of our protagonist was the fact that the trees hadn't attacked them before, which made her think that perhaps they had become more active after getting exposed to sunlight. Right after, they finally realized that almost all the trees around them were also monsters, and Dees quickly reported that he hadn't seen any undead since earlier. Reare then asked the skeleton knight if they had been defeated by someone, to which Dees replied that that was not the case. Our protagonist then concluded that Tale Forest might be a place where trees were active during the day, and the undead during the night. At that moment, Marion asked Reare what they should do because fighting that way would be tough. Carrie then added that even if they defeated them, they just didn't stop attacking. Reare then realized that they were respawning as soon as they were defeated. Right after, she recalled that players could respawn immediately by paying a certain amount of experience points as a penalty, but NPCs and monsters were usually gone for good once they were defeated. One exception to that rule was to become a subordinate through the subordinate skill. Thanks to that, NPCs could respawn after 1 hour as long as their master was alive. Of course, that made her wonder if those trees were respawning because they were someone's subordinates. After hearing that, Ginka suggested Reare to use the subordinate skill on them, like she had done with the ants, and our protagonist immediately agreed. However, when she used the skill, she managed to tame the camphor trant with no restrictions, which confirmed to her that it didn't need a master to respawn. Thanks to that, she concluded that there were simply a lot of trants there. In fact, when she analyzed their skills, she realized that those skills caused their growth cycle to progress really fast, which made her really curious about whether they could take root in the Great Libby Forest. Immediately afterward, she began to count them, before deciding to tame them all and take them back. A while later, she finally finished taming them, and noticed that the sun was setting, so he told the others that she wanted to finish their business there quickly. At that moment, Diz reported that he had just found a place where the undead were becoming more active, and, after praising him, Reare asked him to guide her there, to which he agreed. Shortly after, they arrived in front of a huge tree that was surrounded by skeleton soldiers, and in the lower part of the tree there was a skeleton knight sitting while holding a sword with both hands. After seeing him, Reare asked Diz if he knew him, and the other replied that there was a high possibility that he was one of his comrades in arms. Nevertheless, his appearance had changed, so much that it was hard to say for certain. After hearing that, Reare said that that was true for both sides, before asking Diz to leave the second skeleton knight to her, while he handled the skeletons around them. When our protagonist was getting close to the skeleton knight, the enemy stood up and grabbed the shield that was beside him, while he also created an aura that debuffed the surrounding enemies, which made her realize that his new skeleton knight was of a higher rank than Diz. Immediately thereafter, the battle began, and Reare was surprised after seeing that the skeleton knight had dodged her first attack, before launching a counterattack. In fact, after a while, she had to admit that he was keeping up with her attacks, which made her think that he was the undead boss. Right after, she wondered how he would handle her magic, and then threw a flare arrow towards him. A big explosion occurred, but the undead boss didn't seem damaged by it, so Reare used a skill called Thunderbolt against him before he could counterattack. That second attack was very effective, and made the undead boss kneel, and before he could stand up, our protagonist pointed her sword against his neck, before asking him if he was ready to accept her. For just a second, I really thought our protagonist was really going to struggle against that boss. Shortly after, she managed to tame the undead boss, and discovered that his name was Sieg. After hearing that, Diz arrived, and greeted him, but Sieg couldn't reply, because he couldn't use the friend chat. Immediately thereafter, Reare fixed that issue, and asked Sieg if he was one of Diz's colleagues or something. Right after, Sieg replied that he was the captain of the Third Order, and a junior of Sir Diz. He then explained that in their former country, there were 6 knight orders. Sir Diz's First Order was the Royal Guards, and Sieg's Third Order up to the 6th Order were purely military forces. After hearing that, Reare realized that she had never heard any of that from Diz, and almost immediately asked Sieg which of the 6 kingdoms of the human race they belonged to. Nevertheless, that question confused the undead boss, who replied that as far as he remembered, there should be only one country on that continent, which Diz confirmed. Our protagonist then thought that what they had said meant that there was once a unified country in that continent that no longer existed, and the most important part about that was that there was no such information on the official site. That meant, if it was true, that that continent had a hidden past that hadn't been publicly revealed, which further confirmed her assumption about that game running like a world simulator. Still, she couldn't help but wonder how detailed that environment was. At that moment, Diz interrupted her thoughts by explaining that back then, due to a plot made by top officials in the kingdom, they had gone on an expedition to the Great Libby Forest with the king, which allowed Reare to assume that the forest had become the grave of the royal family. Sieg then added that he had been in a similar situation, and our protagonist quickly said that those top officials, after the fall of the unified kingdom, had established the current 6 kingdoms over its ruins, something she found truly fascinating. Dees then said that those top officials had taken not only their king, but the whole continent. Afterward, he began to look really pissed, before saying that they had even had the guts to split the continent into 6 territories for their own gain. In fact, he added that he couldn't forgive those rats or the kingdoms they had created. In his opinion, they all should pay. After hearing that, Reare asked Sieg if he also resented the 6 kingdoms that currently ruled the continent. The undead boss then replied that he didn't know if he held the same feelings that Sir Dees did, but he had indeed pledged his loyalty to his kingdom. Plus he was responsible for his men who had ended up dying there. So, if the only way to address those feelings was to destroy those 6 kingdoms, then he would pledge his sword to our protagonist. After hearing that, Reare thought that players often sought a goal in a game, but that game lacked a clear objective. In fact, that game had been designed to grow yourself by completing short quests generated by AI. Nevertheless, many players played with other goals in mind. Some players indeed found enjoyment in completing quests, but others defeated raid bosses that the developers had designated as enemies of humanity. Reare then thought that it was not fair that everyone else had a goal, because she also wanted to have her own goal in the game. However, the good part was that she had finally found her goal. Right after, she informed the Skeleton Knights, Marion, Ginka, and Carrie that from that moment onward, their objective was to destroy the 6 kingdoms. She then explained that if they expanded their dominion, just as they had done in the monster territory, and start swallowing up all the areas where humans had settled, those kingdoms would surely begin to crumble, which Dees quickly agreed, before adding that it was the dawn of a new kingdom ruled by our protagonist, so they would unify all the oppressed monsters. Immediately thereafter, Sieg said that he believed that Reare, to whom he had newly pledged his loyalty, was the most fitting to be their ruler. After hearing that, our protagonist said that they should start by taking control of that forest, before explaining that since the undead army was already under her control because they were Sieg's subordinates, the next step was to take care of the trance. Dees then said that there were many trance around, and they were hard to tell apart, which meant that it might take some time to subjugate them. However, our protagonist disagreed with that statement, and told him that he thought they would be fine, because the tree beside them was not just an ordinary tree. After deciding to destroy the 6 kingdoms, Rare's first action is to explore a mighty tree. One of her followers was so curious that she asked her boss about what could be so special about the mighty tree. Reare told her to keep watching the tree. As she was casting spells against the tree reacted, and gave a rumbling noise and leaves fell off the tree. Reare tried to take control of the tree and make it her subordinate. She felt some resistance from it, but managed to overtake it. She saw that the tree was a trend when her status panel appeared. She discovered that the tree was an elder camphor trend. Then she demands to see the tree's status. A notification appeared. It says that Rare's follower has fulfilled a condition for reincarnation with 5,000 experience points, and it asked for the permission to reincarnate her follower. She was surprised that the notification appeared when she was still assessing the tree's reincarnation capacity. It is not that she didn't have the experience points, but she wondered if she could take a loan. But she knew that getting 5,000 experience points is not something easy. She thought that it is better not to overthink it, since there may not be another chance if she failed to utilize the existing opportunity. But there is a lot to think about before making any decision. Why the reincarnation has to be at that moment. What are the conditions for the reincarnation? She saw the need to calm down for a moment, but then she guessed that it is probably only for someone like her. So she dished out her experience points to the tree and proceed with the reincarnation. And soon, flashes of light glow out from the tree illuminating the night. The tree waved its branches, and the light from it becomes more stable, shining brighter and stronger. Soon Reare understood why she had to spend such huge amount of experience points for the tree's reincarnation. Then the status panel appeared and informed Reare that the tree's race name is called the World Tree. Then another notification appeared to say that she had met a crucial condition that has activated her possible reincarnation into a high elf, if only she had 200 experience points. She was so excited that she had an opportunity to reincarnate without looking further for materials or objects. 200 experience points is a lot, but compared to the experience points for the World Tree's reincarnation, it is nothing. She initiated the reincarnation process, then she got transformed to an high elf. She turned to her subordinates to ask if anything has changed about her look. They said her face hasn't changed, only that it looked radiant, and that her hair and ear is now longer than it was before. From her own point of view, the way everyone looked at her has changed. She was happy that she had achieved her goal of reincarnation, but she insists on knowing the condition and timing that triggered her reincarnation. She turned to her subordinates, and she said that they should all return to the great Leah forest. Reare will leave the management of that forest to the World Tree, and ask Sieg if he would like to go with her, and told him that he can ask his senior, Dees, for any details needed. Sieg was happy about the opportunity of working under his senior after a very long time. Dees was also happy when he remembered those good old days. Reare sensed that the two were in good spirit, but she didn't pay close attention to that. Instead, she requests a branch from the World Tree. Later, at her base, Reare mentions that she only asked for a branch, but what she got was as big as any tree that one would find on the street, and with this branch, one can make various things. One of her servants, Remy, arrived. She apologized for keeping her waiting. She had a conical flask filled with some ash regents in it. Reare recalled that she made Remy acquired many production-related skills. At first, she was producing many items, but since the dungeon had a solid assembly line, she worked as a merchant in a nearby town, and she also gathers information for Reare. Reare appreciates the effort that Remy had invested into making the ashes of the World Tree. She said they need to test whether they can duplicate the World Tree reincarnation under different conditions. She said she is aware that the only final material needed for making the Philosopher's Stone is potassium carbonate or ashes made from the World Tree. Regular ashes are useless unless they are substance saturated with magic. Since the regents' names are different, this could mean that the ashes of the World Tree is a variant of a higher quality. She decides to try using the ashes of the World Tree. Then she went very close to the suspended magnum opus. Then she poured the regents in the conical flask on the inside of the magnum opus. All together, the iron sulfur, tran ashes, strong acid, and the magnum opus formed the philosophical stone. Then she got an information on her status panel that the philosophical stone raises the user's rank by 2 levels. Then she asked if Remy could check if the philosopher's stone can be made under different conditions, and if they could produce it in excess. Then she decides to test the philosophical stone on somebody. It was Sir Dees, who volunteered to be the object for the experiment. He thought the philosophical stone might make a difference in him, since undead don't grow stronger as they grow older. He said that their combat capabilities will be greatly enhanced if it is possible for them to grow. So Reare agreed to test the philosophical stone on him. She asked him to move forward, and she handed over the philosophical stone to him as he kneeled, and bowed in obedience to receive the philosophical stone, folding it in his palm. Then the status panel gave another information asking for a permission to reincarnate Sir Dees as a Death Lord with the fee of 100 experience points. Then Reare said that she permits Dees's reincarnation as a Death Lord. The experiment was a success. Dees's appearance got upgraded. He also testified to the fact that he felt much more stronger than he was before the reincarnation. Remy walked up to Reare. She said she was done with the analysis of the Philosopher's Stones. She reported that those stones can be produced massively under the same condition. Reare decides to use one of the Philosopher's Stones, and the system showed that a greater Philosopher's Stone has been used, surprising her because she thought that it was a regular one. As soon as this was done, the status panel released lots of notifications that she had to suspend it all. Immediately, she realized that what she had created wasn't just a philosophical stone, but a greater philosophical stone, because of the high-grade material she used. She looked at the multiple reincarnation options she had. she knows that such options don't appear unless she had met some certain conditions. Then her conflicting mind finally gave way for her to choose between two important options with a sharp contrast, a spirit lord or a demon lord. She remembered that when one thinks of a character ruling the monsters, it surely has to be the demon lord, and also she finds being a demon lord interesting. Then she activated the option for her reincarnation into a demon lord. Suddenly, light filled her whole body, and she was elevated, and then she became her new self with the inclusion of horns, demonic wings, and increased resistance. Judging by the reactions from her subordinates, she had really changed. They said she had changed so much she is now a creature with little ears and shiny horns, with a pair of wings hanging above her waist, but her older features were retained. She mentions that with this flashy look she can't carelessly show herself in public. Shortly after, the system showed that a creature of calamity had been born. The system sent this message to players and NPCs who possess specific skill, surprising Reare in the process. Later, in a beautiful and magnificent castle, a priest was talking to the lord of the castle. He said he received an oracle. The lord of the castle stood up and banged his table. "You said what?" he barked. The priest announced that a new enemy of humanity had been born. The Prime Minister of the kingdom, Douglas Marquis, demands an explanation about the origin of the newest calamity. The priest replied that it is from their continent. He went on saying that it was located on the eastern part of the Reare's kingdom near Urfern, not far from the Great Lieb Forest. The priest continued that the demon lord was born in the Great Lieb Forest, according to the message he received from God. People began to wail and panic. They all said it was a terrible thing for the enemy of man to appear at the central continent. Officials were all seated at a round table. Then one of them asked if the birth of the new calamity means that there are 7 calamities in existence instead of 6. The golden dragon sealed within the ice wall, the true ancestor, and lord of the ominous castle, the lord of Merman, who rules all the seas, the archdemon, who rules over the vast sea of trees of the southern continent, the king of insects from the island nation far east, populated by demi-humans, the archangel, who rules over all the abominable angels, the enemies of humanity, which are the 6 great calamity, bring despair as those beings are feared as the embodiment of death and destruction. Back to the meeting, Douglas demands to know the severity of the 7th calamity's damage. He asked if it could be compared to that of the damage caused by the angels of the Sky Castle. The recorder replied that they don't have any report yet. He said it may be that the calamity has just been born recently and has not been able to exert its full power yet. The priest said there are no record of a calamity being defeated, but there are records of a calamity being challenged after it was born. The priest said they could have a chance to defeat the calamity if they act fast. Douglas got the priest's statement. He understood that if the calamity was just born, it could be a child, and if action is taken at once, they could defeat it. He summoned his commander at once and ordered that the commander and his men form an extermination force against the new calamity immediately. He was aware that it is a period of crisis for all humanity, and every possible measure must be taken, while they still have the chance to win. At Rare's base, she sneezed. Remy was trying to know if she is all right. Dees commented that even Rare's sneeze is so beautiful. She was wondering if someone else somewhere is already talking about her, because system messages are audible to the players that are supposed to receive them, that if anyone heard a message that wasn't intended for them, it means they have some special skills. She wondered what it really means to be a calamity. She thought it could mean being an invasive species like the redback spider or the Louisiana crawfish. She knew that if one carelessly asked the administrators the question of becoming a demon lord, the question will be added to the FAQ later, and it will cause commotion, because it would mean that a player can become a demon lord. She decides to abandon that line of thought and focus on her new position as the demon lord. Now that she has become the demon lord, she felt the need to raise an army that is capable of opposing the human kingdom. I just wish MMOs nowadays were half as cool as this. She thought about reincarnating her subordinates, getting new skills, checking her status as a demon lord, and exploring her area. Later, an announcement reached the other players indicating that there is a second large-scale event coming. Demon Lord Reare was sitting on a throne in her palace with her servant. When she heard the announcement about the second large-scale event, the event will be a large scale of offensive and defensive battles. One of her servants asked if everything is all right. She replied that the large-scale invasion from the monster territory to the human territory is about to start, and that the invasion will occur throughout the entire continent. Dees admits that the entire continent is heading towards a turbulent time. The monster territory will flood the continents with monsters just like the undead. Nearby towns and villages will be under assault during the event. The event will last for 10 in-game days. During these time, players can choose to fight along with either with the monsters or humanity. They must successfully invade or defend their chosen side. Some special rules will be in effect. During the event, player will earn 10% more experience points. Players will not lose experience points upon death, but all their stats will be reduced by 5% for 1 hour in-game. Once per day, players will be able to fast travel from the sanctuary of their current town to a remote sanctuary. Back with Reare, Dees asked Reare about the side she was intending to join, the humans or the monsters. Reare replied that she will be on the monsters' side, since it is too late for her to be on the humans' side. With Rare's answer, Dees sensed that he and his undead soldiers must prepare for the invasion also. Reare added that they could also continue to watch from the sidelines, just as they have always done. But she got interrupted by a direct message from the admins on her status panel. Currently, rare domains include the Great Leap Forest in the eastern part of the Kingdom of Hears, and also the Tolle's Forest where the World Tree was raised. The Tolle Forest was part of her domain, to which she entrusted the World Tree with its management and protection. She wondered why the admins had to go into details. The message continued mentioning that the monsters that were supposed to invade from those areas became Rare's subordinates, and as a result, event can't proceed as planned. Therefore, the admins request Rare cooperation with attacking the Kingdom of Hears for the event, surprising her. At this point, they should give her a job as a DM for the game. Anyway, the message continues saying that this is just a request, and that they will respect Rare's decision if she declines. And if she declines, they will announce that the towns around her area will not participate in the event. If she chooses to cooperate, the administration will prepare some special gift for her. Rare perceived that since she tamed the event monsters and became the Demon Lord, they have decided to give her the honor of a raid boss and ask for her cooperation. They thought that since they can't use NPC bosses, they could just replace them with Rare. Dees asked a question about the types of monsters involved in the large-scale invasion. He said depending on their species, they might either cooperate or compete for the spoils. Rare answered that, probably undead and such, while inwardly asking herself if undead are conveniently spread all over the continent. She realized that the event monsters were actually Dees and Siege. She wondered if the two were prepared specifically for the event. She noticed that during the first event, they announced a change. She felt that it must be because she tamed Dees, forcing them to readjust their plans. One of Rare's subordinates informed her that there is an option to step aside and just observe the whole situation. She was considering this option before. She inwardly debates that the admins will announce that the invasion will not occur around the Great Leap Forest if she declines, and if such announcement were made, she and her subordinates won't be able to hide there any longer. It is like practically sending an indirect message to the other players that there is something to check. She felt that if her actions disrupt the admin's plan, the best she could do is just to cooperate with them. She thought that just as she is enjoying the game, other players also have the right to enjoy the game. Then she declared to her subordinates that they would join the invasion. She made it known that if she is going to participate in the invasion, she intends to win with her full power. And if it happened that some cities are destroyed along the way, that could be assumed to be the side effect of the event. Suguru said that she doesn't fully understand what her boss is doing, but she knows that her boss is enjoying herself. Rare thanked her, and she moved on to say if they were attacking a city, they will have to deal with knights and soldiers. Dees cuts in. He said he doesn't believe that the border towns have so many knights, because only a few of them have pledged allegiance to a local lord, and Rare asked why. Sieg replied. He said the Pledge of Allegiance also burdens the one receiving the aid. He said a local lord in the frontier can only sustain so many knights. Reare remembered that she once read about the knights in the admin's Q&A. It said that to become a knight, one must be a subordinate to a noble or a specific NPC. She realized that what Dee said corresponds to the subordinate skill. Being subordinate classify knights as retainers with the ability to respawn after death. Reare thought that she could leave the knight's lord alive and hunt the respawning knights for experience points. Dees replied that Rare's idea might not be efficient because of the small numbers of their enemy soldiers, and also that most soldiers stay dead once slain. Reare said she was thinking of how she could make use of the enemies that won't die easily to her own advantage. She thought that conquering a city might be easier than expected. Remy said a city like Urfaron won't last 1 hour against their army. Surprising Reare. Reare thought that the admins planned this event to last 10 days, but it might just end in a day. She requested a map, and she begins to plan for the invasion, while thinking that holding back will be a mockery to other players. She acknowledged that she is also a player that gives her best to the game. Even a solo player would want other players to think that he or she is amazing because of that. She wouldn't like the event to end without others realizing the results of her efforts. The planning resumes, and on the map they saw that there is Urfaron, and also the town of Lourdes, which is found near the Tolle forest. On the event day, the demon lord's subordinates marched in their ranks to the hall, where they stood in attention, waiting for the command of their leader. They stood in array of battalions with the 2 skeleton knights, Dees, and Sieg standing in front of them. The hall wasn't big enough, so it could not contain all of them. Shugru promised to forward her message via friend chat to those who weren't able to participate. Carrie thought that Rare's idea to speak to them all is the right thing to do since it will help stir their hearts and lift their spirits. Shortly after, Reare began her speech. She said the time to face humanity had finally come, and they are to march with pride as a monster army that will ravage all humanity. She admitted that she had caused them a great deal of hardship. She said by ensuring they killed only those strong enough to fight back, they determine how much experience they acquired, while making sure they were killed at the right time. She went on to say that the psychological strain must have been immense, and that she owed them an apology and her gratitude. She said the period of their suffering is over, and that from that day onward, they will step into the main stage, and starting with the kingdom of Hears, they will attack Urfaron, a town bordering the forest, and declare war on every human kingdom. She said all that as she spread her hands and winds. Then she said, there is no reason to hold back now. She said if anyone crosses their path, they are to melt them, burn them, destroy or pierce them, killing them without hesitation, passing the message that the monsters are here in the great Lieb forest. She ended her speech by saying that with their powers, they will show to the humans that she is the supreme ruler of the continent. The army roared and clanged their weapons, and let out a war cry. Everywhere was noisy, everyone was excited. Then she ordered that they should all move out at once. Later, in Urfaron, there was chattering noise that could be heard from a distance. A man said the town is super busy for the day. He thought that could be because of the new people who had been coming to the town lately. A waiter said the new mercenaries had been talking about something. Apparently, an army of monsters is coming to attack. The man said all the mercenaries have been gathering at the town gate for a long time. He demands to know if the woman is really serious about what she has said. She said if the town gets attacked, the tavern where he drinks on credit will be gone, and he will not have to pay a dime. Another man said he has been disowned by his family, so he has nowhere to go. While 2 players were walking alongside each other on the background, hearing part of the conversation. One of them said that the NPCs are carefree. His other friend reminds him that they can't receive any system messages, so it's not their fault. The first one said that the battle against the monsters is going to be exciting. Their conversation was interrupted by a noise from afar, and somebody cried that the monsters are here. Then the 2 friends panicked, and one of them asked a random person about the kind of monsters that are coming to attack them. He wants to know if they are ants or undeads. His friend with the ponytail told him that they are ants, a swarm of ants charging towards them. What they didn't know is that Reare was supervising the swarm. The ant army marches on, while two people look at them from a watchtower. One of them questions, why are there monsters attacking the city? Because this has never happened before. The other one mentions, while looking scared, that this is bad and wonders if they can protect the city against so many of them. Frustrated, he blames the newcomers and told his partner that they messed with the forest and pissed off the monsters. The players, on the other hand, announced that the event's monsters in this city are ants from that great forest. A confused player mentions that he heard that the main enemies were supposed to be undead. Another player told them that, as he thought, they can't just ignore the local monsters, while another annoying player started making dad jokes saying that they are too antsing to ignore. Once the ants got closer, one player asked what's going on, because those ants don't look like the usual ones. Right after the ants started attacking, while our protagonist looks at the battle from the sky, finding the dad joke from the annoying player funny. Reare was inside the reincarnated Yoroizaka that evolved into a divine fortress, while it was using the camouflage skill that allow it to become invisible, and fly skill that consumes MP based on the distance traveled. Reare then asks if the newcomers that the NPCs were complaining about were the players. She continues saying that she is the one who started this invasion, so it's not their fault. But then she argues that she is a player too. So doesn't that mean that it's the players' fault after all? While inwardly thinking that players really are the worst, she is interrupted by Carrie, that tell her that, if they rain down a bunch of powerful spells on the city from the sky, then the invasion would end quickly. Reare tells her that, by doing it, she could easily end this battle on her own. But she wants to conquer this like a true demon lord, using the strength of her subordinates. Right after Shuguru told Reare that the enemy has started closing the gate, and it looks like they're preparing for a siege. Reare them told her that once the gates are fully closed, they should attack them. If they destroy the gate, it'll surely break their morale, to which Shuguru agreed. And once the gate closed, Reare gave the order to fire. At that moment, a big explosion destroyed not only the gate, but part of the wall, leaving the players flabbergasted. And, as soon as the wall finished crumbling, the ants started to pour into the city, attacking everyone. The ponytail player from before tried to fight back, and told the other players not to panic, because it was just like fighting in the Great Forest Dungeon. They have the advantage in narrow areas. He then noticed that the ant's abdomen was pointing at him, and immediately afterwards blast him, engulfing half his body in fire, and killing him in the process. He was not the only one getting roasted by the ants, leaving the players surprised, and wondering what's happening. They have never seen ants firing cannons and spitting fire before, while Reare was enjoying the view from the sky. She then explained that artillery and assault units can't be used inside the Great Forest. She had never deployed them when welcoming them to the dungeon. So, this is the perfect opportunity to do that, and she hoped that they enjoy the show from the best seats in the house. They are playing Helldivers, and Reare is the entire Terminate army. This is really cool. Anyway, Shuguru then informed Reare that they're gaining control of the city's outer areas, to which Reare answered that they should continue slaughtering the enemy. Then some shouting got Rare's attention. She then asked, "Who's that?" And Shuguru informed her that she believed they are the Order of Knights, who have subordinated themselves to the local lord. Reare then wonders how they should deal with them, when she saw the Vespoids on standby. She told Shuguru that those Vespoid soldiers that she has on observation duty seemed bored, and she thinks it's time to give them something to do. Shuguru agreed, and Reare leave the details of the attack to Shuguru. Meanwhile, in the battlefield, the players think that it is hopeless, because there's just too many of them. Seeing that the leader of the knights said that, it's pathetic losing to mere ants, ordering them to get out of the way. Right after the ants retreated, and while the leader wondered why, one knight told him that something is coming from above. Soon after, the bees could be seen clearly. The leader was surprised that the enemy wasn't just ants, and wonder out loud why didn't anybody tell him about the bees, and that those mercenaries can't even report the situation properly. His rant was interrupted by the bees that grab him and the other knights, And while the leader wondered what they are trying to do, he noticed the beautiful scene of the city from high above. Then the bees just released them, and with that we now know that this game was inspired by Dark Souls because gravity is the deadliest weapon. Rare notices that none of the knights' corpses disappeared, so if they are not respawning instantly, then they're confirmed NPCs. When players die, a system message appears asking them if they want to respawn, but NPCs can't choose an option because they can't receive system messages. That's why they can't respawn. But an NPC bound by the subordinate skill is different. They can respawn automatically after 1 hour. Rare confirmed that using Shigaru subordinates. Rare then thought, if any of those knights were under the Pledge of Allegiance and bound by the subordinate skill, they will probably respawn after passing that time. But they aren't giving enough XP, so farming them looks pointless. And with this, Rare declares that infinite knight farming is cancelled, and to just find and kill their master. Shigaru them ask Rare, what shall they do with the Lord's Manor? If they established a new base in this town, she thinks that Her Majesty could use it. But Rare stop her by telling her that there's no need. This location is too close to the forest and has no strategic value. So she order her to raise everything to the ground. Then Rare decide to check Lourdes next, and she leaves Shigaru to take care of the rest. Right after she used Summon Vision to control Almanaz. She then mentions that she left the trance in charge, so she is wondering how it's going. The scene then changes to a Lourdes that was been completely taken over by trees. Rare sees that Lourdes is in terrible condition, and as she lands in one of the trees, she guessed that you could call this beautiful in its own way. Rare is then interrupted by a voice telling her that, to be praised by someone so divine and beautiful as Her Majesty, the Demon Lord, is an incredible honor. She then continues saying that Rare had witnessed her skill in its full effect by now, the great blessing. Rare recognized the voice as the World Tree, while thinking that the Great Blessing is a skill that abnormally accelerates the growth of all plants' life within its range. Rare then continues saying that this endless stretch of trees from Tole Forest is impressive, but she asks the World Tree if it's not about time to stop, as she watches the trees still growing. The World Tree tells Rare that her MP is nearly depleted, so she'll cease now, and with that the trees stop growing, and a eerie silence fell onto the city. Rare noticed that nothing is moving, and asked if everyone in the town got wiped out, and the World Tree told her that it seems like it, and asked what shall they do with the town. Rare just told her to let the forest consume it. After that the World Tree asked Rare what are her plans moving forward. Rare then mentions that the next stop is probably a picnic in La Colline. According to the map, La Colline is a major trade hub. If they took it, it will completely cut off this kingdom's lifeline. Also, she wants to create a new dungeon, and for that, she has been looking for a new location. And since the event is still going on, she might as well aim for the highest impact to become their base. The royal capital, the crown jewel of the kingdom. Rare declares that they'll reduce it to ruins and turn it into a nest for undead.
Meanwhile, in the royal capital city, the people were at peace and had no idea about the destruction that went on in the other cities. In the royal castle, Wayne was accompanied by 2 knights. He had no idea how he had ended up there. At the beginning of the second official event, he joined the defense forces of Urfarin. His comrades said that they were faced with the usual ants, and that they should show them what they've got. However, the ants overwhelmed them, and they all died. Wayne would have been able to resurrect in an hour, but the system gave him the option to respawn immediately. Due to the event, there would be no XP penalty. When he woke up, he saw himself in a different town. Immediately after, he tried to pull himself together, and he swore he would successfully defend the town. Sadly, the town quickly fell to the wave of monster attacks. The same thing happened to the next town he was sent to, and the one after that. It's almost like he's just bringing bad luck wherever he goes. However, this was how he found himself sent all the way to the royal capital. Moreover, he was just an average player, and he knew he wasn't strong. But the way he got beaten badly still stung him. He wondered how someone like him, who wasn't even a top player, managed to get inside the royal castle. He had gone to the mercenary guild to gather more intel and also grab a meal. But as soon as he opened his inventory, the knights dragged him to the castle, which wasn't an area that was normally available to players. The knight then knelt before the Prime Minister and told him that he had brought a safe holder. Douglas welcomed Wayne and introduced himself properly. He could tell that Wayne was wondering why he had been summoned there. But before he got to the main topic, he wanted to explain the kingdom's current situation. Immediately after, he pointed out that monster attacks were happening all over the kingdom. On the other hand, Wayne thought that this was just an event to players. But the NPCs hadn't realized what was really happening. Douglas then mentioned that the first incident happened about 10 days ago. Wayne was shocked to hear this, because the event should have only started the day before. Douglas continued and said that the Patriarch of the Holy Church of Hears declared that he had received an oracle. Wayne was confused by this and wondered if this oracle was like a system message meant for only NPCs. Afterward, Douglas told him that according to the oracle, a new enemy of humanity had been born. The enemies of humanity were also called calamities. Each one of them had the power to easily destroy the continent. While there were 6 of these special monsters in the world, the oracle stated that a 7th one had been born. Immediately after, Wayne asked if this was the reason behind the monster invasion, to which the Prime Minister said that he was glad that Wayne caught on quickly. Wayne then concluded that this calamity had to be the event's final boss. Douglas then told him that the reason he was called there was that he wanted the guy to gather as many allies as possible and help them fight the calamity that was headed for the royal capital. Wayne told him that the calamity coming to the royal capital was way too sudden and asked if he had any proof. Immediately after, a knight brought a map to the table as Douglas confirmed that he had the proof. He said that according to the oracle, the calamity was born in the Great Leah Forest. He had also heard that the area was overrun by ant monsters. He pointed to Urfarin and told Wayne that he also heard the town was quickly annihilated by an ant attack, to which Wayne confirmed it, because he was in Urfarin when the ants attacked. On that same day, the town of Lords was swallowed whole by plant-type monsters, and to the north, where they had the towns of Verd Sud and Altariva, it was reported that they were destroyed by skeletons. This meant that a great variety of monsters were raging unchecked. Douglas also added that Lukalin, a vital transportation hub of their kingdom, was also attacked by giant wasps carrying ants. Wayne was surprised, because there were wasps in Urfarin too. The Prime Minister told him that the fact that similar attacks were happening, and considering that the ants were present in the forest, where the calamity was born, it led them to believe that the ants and wasps may be direct subordinates of the calamity, the Great Leah Forest, Erin, and Lukalin. Douglas said that if they connected all these towns, it would prove that the monsters were heading west, and what lay ahead of that trail was the royal capital. Immediately after, Wayne thought if this was a flag that triggered the event's final boss. He also thought that there was no way he could fight something like that, because he was struggling against the small fry monsters. As he looked at the map, he figured that the battles were supposed to happen at the kingdom's borders. But it didn't make sense to him why the boss suddenly appeared deep in the kingdom. He thought more about the situation and confirmed that Lukalin was attacked the same day. He noted that Lukalin was pretty far from the royal capital. If the news reached the Prime Minister so fast, he asked if Lukalin was actually closer to the royal capital than it looked. However, Douglas said that it was about an 8-day journey on foot, and even by horse, it would take 2 days. Wayne then asked how the Prime Minister got the information so fast. Douglas stood up and said that he might already know this, but nobles were able to have what was known as retainers. In fact, he said 9 days ago, they dispatched an extermination force from the royal capital to slay the calamity, and among them was a knight who served as his retainer. The knight had just been resurrected in the royal capital, and reported that the extermination force was completely wiped out in Lukalin moments ago. Immediately after, Wayne couldn't believe what he heard. He recalled that when a player dies, their respawn location would be where they last slept. That was why he randomly respawned when his last inn was destroyed along with the town. He said that if they resurrected in the capital, it meant that the last place those knights slept before leaving 9 days ago was there. Douglas quickly confirmed his guess and said that the knights hadn't slept for a moment since they left the capital, which left Wayne completely shocked. Douglas said that the knights were given powerful potions to prevent them from falling asleep. Their knights would be able to march for days, no matter how long, without ever resting. Wayne figured this was how NPCs shared information. As he guessed, dying to report back was faster and more accurate. But he was still shocked at the extreme lengths they went to. Douglas told him that he wouldn't understand, but the nobles needed to protect the kingdom and its people. Their knights had sworn loyalty to that cause, and they share the same desire to defend the land. He said that even if they were no match for the calamity, they would fight until the last man fell. Wayne thought that this made it hard to believe that they were just NPCs because, whether it was a VRMMO or not, they were still alive in the world. He didn't want to dismiss their words just because it was a game, and he wondered if there was any way he could help them. However, he also thought about what an average player like himself could even do. Afterward, Douglas said that their discussion had gone on for too long, and he once again asked Wayne for his assistance in gathering defenders for the royal capital. He mentioned that he heard that safeholders could instantly communicate with each other. He asked if Wayne could use that information network to rally his allies. Wayne knew that he wasn't strong by himself, but if it was about gathering power to oppose the calamity, then maybe he could do this. He then decided to give it a shot. Wayne and Galgamish arrived at the royal castle garden. Wayne thanked his companion, saying that if Galgamish hadn't stepped in, he wouldn't have been able to convince the others. Galgamish told him to cut it out, because they hadn't beaten the boss yet. Immediately afterward, Monkey Dive Sasuke stepped in, agreeing that it was too early for Wayne to say thanks. The whole kingdom getting destroyed was no joke. He had thought that Wayne was baiting them, but he saw that Wayne wasn't lying after all. A lot of other players also gathered alongside him. Amatane, Those Warm Hands, Tough and Doesn't Peel, Country Pop, Mentalist Orinki, and lastly, Yoichi. Yoichi said he believed it from the start. After all, Wayne was one of Gilgamesh's friends. All these players assembled at the royal castle garden, ready to defend the kingdom. Wayne could recognize all of them as top-tier players from the game. He then thanked all of them for coming. Immediately afterward, Yoichi recalled that Wayne was the one who had information about Reare, who was the winner of the last tournament. He then asked if she was in the Great Libby Forest. Afterward, Amatane asked if he had any luck contacting Reare, since having her there would boost their odds significantly. However, Wayne said he didn't know where she was. He also added that he and Reare were not friends because she was a player killer. He figured that she most likely played solo as well. Since there was no helping it, Galgamish decided they should start planning their strategy. He appointed Wayne as the leader, which left him shocked. The other players reminded Wayne that they were only there to back him, as Galgamish said. Immediately afterward, Wayne pointed out that it was only because Galgamish joined the cause in the first place. Regardless, Galgamish reminded Wayne that it wasn't he who gathered everyone there. They all came because they believed in Wayne's words. Staring at all the players in front of him, Wayne clenched his fists and accepted to be the leader. Immediately afterward, Douglas approached and was surprised to see that Wayne had gathered so many people. As he walked down the stairs, he said that words couldn't express the gratitude he had for Wayne. He noted how the players were willing to go so far for them, even though none of them were knights of the kingdom, but they also couldn't simply stand by idly. Douglas then said that His Majesty had ordered them to assist the players in any way they could. So, he got permission to use their national treasure. The players stood in shock as the national treasure was about to be revealed. But we don't get to see it, because Reare and her army of ants were flying through the skies of the kingdom. She noted how La Colline had fallen, which was good for her plans. However, the soldiers of that city were tougher than she expected. Even headshots from sniper ants were blocked, and the number of soldiers was insane. Immediately afterward, Reare got a message from Shugaru, asking if the soldiers could be reinforcements from the royal capital. Reare replied that they had only taken the neighboring city the previous day, so it was way too fast for reinforcements to have arrived already. Shugaru speculated that their enemies might have employed some unconventional means. Reare agreed that it was also a possibility, but if their enemies really sent an army to subjugate her, then she would have to retaliate even harder. Immediately afterward, Reare thought that if she attacked the royal capital with the same amount of force she used in La Colline, the damage would be too great. And this made her scared. The artillery ants would destroy the city itself. Nevertheless, she wanted to slaughter the people inside and leave the buildings intact. so she thought it was probably time to deploy her elite forces. Rare then contacted Suguru, ordering her to summon the ants to her position and pull everyone back. Immediately afterward, a magic circle appeared around the ants, and they were teleported back to the base. Rare commended her soldiers and told them to stay in the forest for the meantime. With only her left on the field, there was no reason for our protagonist to hold back anymore. She decided to speed up, so she boosted herself to her next destination. Moments later, she arrived at the royal capital. Looking over the city, she said it was so beautiful and felt that it would be blasphemy to reduce such beauty to ruins. However, she was so excited to get started. Rare wondered which location to strike first. Immediately afterward, something flew toward her, and her armor quickly blocked it. She called out to Yorozaka, and found out that the auto-intercept system was activated to stop the attack. Feeling furious, she looked around to find the person who attacked her. Rare then saw the players over at the royal castle garden, and she was shocked that they could see her. Her camouflage skill was active, so the players shouldn't have been able to perceive her. She then wondered if they had a skill that could see through her camouflage. Meanwhile, the other players commended Yorichi's good eyesight as he pointed out where their target was. Afterward, Rare began casting a spell to deal with the players. But she suddenly changed her mind, saying that she could deal with them later. Her sights were set on taking over the royal capital. So, she used her magic to call forth the adamants. Suddenly, an army of undead soldiers appeared in the sky, dropping down into the city, like paratroopers without parachutes. Rare then told her troops that they would use the city as their base once they secured it, and she ordered them to try not to destroy the buildings. As more of the skeletons dropped down, the adamant leader took charge as the knights followed. The citizens of the city screamed and ran for their lives as they saw the monsters. The capital was already falling under our protagonist's control. Rare then decided it was time for her to deal with the people outside the city walls. Immediately afterward, she disabled her camouflage since the players could see through it anyway. Rare then decided to turn the lot of them into experience points. She landed in front of the players, and they quickly took up arms as they noticed her presence. Cue the Millennia boss battle music. However, she was incredibly huge, and they wondered what kind of race she was. Wayne then nervously asked if she was the Calamity, but didn't get a response. On the other hand, Amatane noted that she was the one who summoned the undead soldiers earlier. Because of this, he was sure that Rare was the event's final boss. The players were shocked that the final boss was able to reach the royal capital within 2 days. Amatane said that betting on Wayne's information was the right call for them. The players cheered loudly, feeling glad that it was time to fight the boss, and they made sure to stick to their plan. They quickly took a defensive stance, ready for the fight. On the other hand, Rare thought that her enemies were probably planning to use some tricky maneuvers. But it didn't matter to her. Be it arrows or magic, our protagonist was confident that the result would be the same. With Yorozaka, nothing could get through her. Immediately after, Orinki said that if they took down the boss, they would definitely be the MVPs of the event. Galgamesh was eager as well, because he couldn't wait for the loot. Not having Rare, the last event winner, was unfortunate, but everyone there was still a top-tier player. They were the strongest force ever assembled. As they were confident that their strength was enough to beat a whole bunch of Rares. If it was just an event boss, they saw no reason to fear. Rare's hands suddenly twitch, itching to show her enemies her true powers. In a flash, Rare vanished from her enemy's sight and quickly slashed Galgamesh. The force of the attack was so powerful that his shield was split in half, and he lost an arm. Scared, the other players called out to him. Breathing hard, Galgamesh assured them that he was fine and not dead yet. But the expensive shield he bought was split apart in one hit. On the other hand, Rare was shocked to see that she didn't finish him off, because Galgamesh should have been split in half already. Immediately afterward, those warm hands said to leave it to her as she activated a regeneration skill. A magic aura then surrounded Galgamesh, and his arm slowly grew back. He clenched his fists and thanked the healer for restoring his arm. However, Rare was stunned to see that healing magic had been discovered already. Skills like that were meant for teamwork. If someone had found it, they would share it on the public forums, but Rare hadn't checked that in ages. She had assumed that being the top XP earner meant that she was the one who had most of the skill tree figured out. She thought this was interesting and decided that once the event was over, she would start researching skills again. Suddenly, she was struck by a huge lightning attack. Reare was in the middle of a battle and blamed herself for being lost in thought at this crucial time. But she could easily let her natural region heal that much damage. Immediately after, she noticed something was off. She couldn't believe Yorizaka actually took damage. In the last event, Yorizaka shrugged off player attacks like it was nothing. So, Reare wondered if the players here were that strong. Seeing this, she decided that she would crush them first. But as she dashed forward, a huge shadow engulfed her, and she was in complete darkness, unable to see anything. She heard the other players signaling to attack since her sight was blocked. And she got a bad feeling about that. Her next move would damage Yorizaka a lot, but she didn't have a choice. Immediately afterward, Reare unleashed her Hell Flame spell, and a huge fire burst out, overwhelming the players. They wondered who fired the spell, because it wasn't part of their plan. Orinki then explained to her fellow players that it was the Calamity that shot a wide-range spell at itself. One of the guys wondered if Reare self-destructed and questioned why she would do that. As the flames raged on, Reare emerged from them. She believed her spell should have burned the mob to ashes. But her vision was still dark. Immediately afterward, the female healer activated her Area Light Heal spell, restoring vitality to all her comrades. She tried to make sure everyone was okay, and they thanked her for the support. Meanwhile, Reare couldn't believe that not a single one of them died. She fired Hellflame, expecting heavy damage to Yorizaka too, so it felt unfair. Galgamash then remarked that the field debuff saved their asses. Though it was annoying to set up, it was worth it. Orinki quickly yelled at Galgamash not to say that, speculating that the event boss might be a high-tier AI. She feared Reare would adapt to what he just said. However, Reare was shocked to hear about the field debuff. She couldn't believe that the battlefield was prepared to weaken her right from the very beginning. Reare thought this was beyond mere carelessness, because she assumed no one could beat her. She thought that if her subordinates struggled during this event, all it would take was for her to step in and finish it off. However, our protagonist got arrogant, and this was the result. As she stood before her enemies, she clenched her fist furiously, swearing to never forgive this. Reare was furious at her own stupidity, but she refused to lose to them. Immediately after, she deployed her swords, thinking that if she couldn't see, then she would just let Kenzaki trample them with their own strength. Suddenly, the swords fell to the ground. Reare panicked, wondering what had happened to Kenzaki. Just then, she also noticed something was happening to Yorizaka's movements. Reare fell to the ground, and a screen popped up, showing that her armor had been afflicted by fear. Not only did it restrict her movements, but her vision and hearing were impaired as well. Using mental magic like fear on undead required special conditions. Yorizaka wasn't an undead, but similar rules applied to it, because it was a hybrid between a homunculus and a golem. Yorizaka and Kenzaki could resist mental magic, so Reare never invested experience points to boost their mind stats. But with the field debuff alone, she couldn't believe how vulnerable they were. Immediately afterward, Galgamish praised Mentalist for being able to pierce an event boss's mental resistance. He asked how min-maxed the guy was. Mentalist then explained that it was due to the blind status, and that darkness gave an extra penalty and decreased resistance to fear. More importantly, his soulstones were consumed. Mentalist then told his comrades that the boss was an undead. Hearing about darkness and soulstones, Reare thought this was all information she didn't know. Afterward, all the players focused their attacks on her at the same time. As Reare got attacked, she thought that with this rate of DPS, Yorizaka wouldn't die, and she could wait until the fear status wore off. But she felt that for her to stay in such a pathetic state was unforgivable. There was no way she could allow that. Reare decided it wasn't the time for her to be concerned about hiding her appearance from others. Afterward, she cast her whiteout spell, causing a bright, blinding light to overwhelm the players. Slowly, she emerged from the Yorizaka armor. The players noticed something was coming out and wondered if this was the boss's second form. Reare then freed her wings and gracefully showed her true form. This is so cool, is like Millennia's second phase, and is going to be as deadly for them. The players stared at her, amazed and speechless. Wayne was stunned as he thought he was looking at an angel. As Rare's feathers floated in the air, she stared down at her enemies. With her full power, she was ready to crush them all. After taking a fierce assault, Rare finally emerged from Yoroizaka, revealing her true form. However, the sunlight was too dazzling for her as she tried to shield her face. She wondered if this was because of the albinism trait. Also, the weak vision debuff affected her sight, making her accuracy pretty bad as well. Because of this, she couldn't aim her spells properly at her targets. Meanwhile, the players assumed the mastermind behind the undead outbreak was the angel before them. One of them thought the effect from earlier was useless. But Wayne would cut him, and he remarked that the soul-binding stones were consumed. So, he claimed the enemy was definitely an undead, but probably an angel that had been turned into an undead. Immediately afterward, Rare couldn't believe how they were just chatting away so casually. She wondered if they thought they were safe just because they blinded her. Then, she quickly took off, determined to make them regret their carelessness. In a flash, she knocked off the head of one of the players, and the others only realized what had happened seconds later. At that moment, they realized Rare was way tougher than she looked. While they all tried to stay cautious, Rare grabbed the leg of another player and blew him away, causing the body to crash into a wall. The other players were shocked to see that she did this barehanded. Wayne was sure that she was purely magic specialized. More than that, he wondered why she was even moving, since she was supposed to be under the fear debuff. He quickly assumed it was a molt, and told the others that she had shed her outer shell to cancel the debuff. Hearing this, Rare thought he had quite the sharp instincts. After all, the one under the fear status was Yoroizaka. As long as she was out of his body, it didn't affect her. Immediately afterward, the mage decided he would throw her back into the darkness once more. He then asked the others, who rushed forward, to buy him some time until the darkness cooldown was over. But they were too slow for Rare, as at that moment, she activated a magic circle beneath her, leaving the others stunned. Suddenly, eyeballs began forming around her slowly, and they were all connected to each other. When it was done, our protagonist cast a lightning shower on her enemies. Streaks of lightning rained down on all of them, and they could only groan in agony. By the time she was done, more of the players had been defeated. Mentalist was also down, and he was the only one who could lock her down with the fear debuff. Meanwhile, hearing their voices, Rare was able to get a rough idea of their direction, so she decided to blanket the area with AoE spells. That way, there would be no need for her to risk melee combat. As the dust settled, Wayne told his comrades not to back down yet, because the mission objective hadn't changed. He told them to regroup, remarking that they couldn't let the boss move from this spot. He then ordered the frontliners to close the distance and pin her down. Immediately afterward, Amatane quickly rushed forward, telling his comrades to leave it to him. He swung hard at Rare, but she dodged effortlessly before kicking off his head in one swoop. As his body dissipated, the other melee combatants swarmed her to attack at once. Seeing the situation, our protagonist realized this wasn't good for her. Instantly, she unleashed a huge snowstorm spell. The attack completely overwhelmed the players. They couldn't believe it was the boss's attack. Rare was firing off AoE magic again, even hitting herself in the process. When the dust settled, she looked like she had taken a lot of damage. The remaining players panicked as they saw the bodies of their comrades fade away. They wondered how many they had lost. Then, Wayne remarked that everyone who had just rushed in was done for. Gilgamesh could tell the damage was too much, and then he asked Wayne if they should fall back, but Wayne refused. He decided that they would keep pressing with melee combat. He said that if they attacked en masse, Rare would have no other choice but to keep spamming AoE spells. So, he didn't plan to give her the freedom to choose. But instead, he would force her into self-destructive attacks, and whittle her down until there was an opening. Meanwhile, Rare stared coldly at them, and figured out that Wayne was the leader, who kept barking out orders. He was the reason that the players' coordination was so tight. With that in mind, she quickly cast a spell that instantly moved her close to the enemies, leaving them too stunned. As she was in front of Wayne, she decided that at the very least, she would take him down, and while our protagonist moved to attack, Wayne was too slow to react. Instantly, his body was pierced by her hands in a single strike. The rest of the players were stunned as they saw their leader's chest being pierced through. Wayne struggled with the pain as he held onto Rare's hands. While her hand was still stuck in him, she believed she had finally crushed the leader, and that this would disrupt the coordination of the other players. Still, it was a bit confusing why he was holding on so tightly to her. Our protagonist was unable to pull her hand out, and she wished Wayne would just die and respawn already because he was in her way. She was unaware of the incoming projectiles until a rain of arrows landed all around her. Turning back, she noticed Yoichi was targeting all her opening with precision. At the same time, Monkey Dai Sasaki dashed behind her. Holding some items in his hands, he threw them at her. He believed he had nailed her with the squid ink balls, and now she was in darkness status again. But he'd be shocked by the scene before him. As the smoke settled, he saw that Wayne had been pierced all around by arrows. Our protagonist decided to use him as a meat shield to protect herself. While the players were stunned that their leader was being used as a shield, Reare decided to cast her magic one more time. She unleashed the lightning shower on them, causing a great deal of pain. But those warm hands immediately healed all her comrades. However, she had hit her limit. Gilgamesh figured that if he was going to move, he had to do it now, since Wayne had been defeated. While Rare's lightning shower was still striking the entire field, she noticed her skin had been tingling for a while. And she wondered if her LP was being shaved by the albinism debuff effect. Based on her remaining LP, she couldn't waste any more time here. And from what she could tell, there was only one player using healing magic. In that case, she decided to crush them with so many attacks that their healing wouldn't be able to keep up. Mustering up more power, she unleashed prominence on them. While the players were still suffering from the effects of that, our protagonist went ahead to also cast earthquake magic, followed by a hurricane that swept the entire battlefield. She decimated the whole place, causing the players to be thrown into a wild panic. Reare unleashed a full course of AoE magic with self-destructive intent. Those warm hands tried to keep up with her healing magic, but she was being way too slow. At that healing speed, they would all be wiped out in no time. Soon enough, nothing but smoke filled the whole area. As it slowly settled, our protagonist could see the dead player bodies dissipating, and she began laughing. Her laughter grew more cynical as she saw that the enemy's front line had been annihilated. All that was left for her to take down were the small fry in the back. However, in a flash, Gilgamesh appeared in front of her, holding her down. Seeing him, our protagonist recalled that he was the tank she had slashed at the start of the fight. She wondered how he was able to make his way through that storm of AoE attacks, and that's when she slowly figured it out. The healer had only been healing Gilgamesh this entire time while abandoning all the others. So much for teamwork. They must have been really desperate to win this. Having caught her now, he remarked that it took a lot to shave down her LP, but at least he had gotten her this far. He then signaled the others to attack. One of them conjured up an item in her hands and shattered it on the ground. Our protagonist suddenly felt something overwhelm her body, and she was also feeling weaker. Looking at Gilgamesh, she noticed he was already dead. She wondered why his LP had suddenly hit 0 now. That earlier attack was indiscriminate, reducing everyone's LP, and with that she realized it was an LP damage item. Before she knew it, Rare's LP was in the red zone. This was a very bad situation for her. Shielding herself from the sun, Reare knew she would die from just the albinism burn damage alone. If she was to survive, she needed to get out of the field as soon as possible. However, our protagonist couldn't walk with both Wayne and Gilgamesh's body holding her down. She realized this was why they hadn't instantly respawned. Since she couldn't move on foot, she sprouted her wings to take to the skies. Seeing the other players charge toward her, Reare could hardly believe that she was being forced to run away. But with no other choice, she blasted off and knocked off Gilgamesh's body because the weight was holding her down. As soon as she decided to carpet bomb the corpses with her magic, she took a closer look at Wayne's face, which left her stunned. Our protagonist recalled he was the one she had met in the forest earlier on. And while she was distracted by that memory, Yoichi quickly aimed his arrow at her. He had gotten her right in his sights. So, he charged up a very powerful shot, and upon releasing it, it pierced through Rare's forehead instantly. One of Rare's skeleton soldiers was pursuing a poor young lady who cried for help while desperately running away from the monster. Unfortunately, she ended up tripping and falling to the ground, and when she turned around, she saw the skeleton ready to kill her with its sword. She immediately closed her eyes, but after a while, the finishing blow didn't come, which confused her. The young lady then opened her eyes and realized that the monster was disintegrating along with the other monsters inside the city. Meanwhile, Reare saw a system message that said that she could be resurrected within 1 hour. Still, the system asked if she would like to respawn immediately, before informing that during that event, there would be no EXP loss. Obviously, our protagonist chose to respawn immediately. and the next thing she saw was that she had appeared on her throne. Now that's a proper reality check. I love this, because even though she is OP, she can fail. We can have proper dangerous situations for her. At that moment, she imagined Carrie being next to her, but the reality was that no one was there. It was then that it finally sank in. She realized that she had died, and because the master, she, had died, all of her subordinates had died as well. Moreover, NPCs couldn't respawn immediately because they couldn't receive system messages. She then leaned back on her throne while telling herself that she would be alone there for an hour. Right after, Rare wondered if Carrie and the others were doing fine. After all, they had suddenly died. Afterwards, she said that, in a way, that situation was good. She even believed that she had been lucky. At that moment, she admitted that she had gotten carried away. She, who had earned the most XP, neglected to gather information, thinking she understood the game the most, and as a result of challenging other players without a strategy, she was spectacularly defeated, which I enjoyed to my heart's content. Furthermore, under normal circumstances, she would have lost 10% of her total XP as a death penalty, but thanks to the ongoing event, she had dodged that bullet. After all, if she had lost 10% at that moment, nobody knew what would have happened to her or the world tree, which cost a massive amount of XP. That was the reason she believed that her current situation was nothing short of luck. And to be better prepared in the future, she decided that from that moment onward, she should always keep a 10% XP reserve. After all, hedging your bets was one of the fundamentals of investment. She had truly decided to be more careful from that moment onward. Of course, if she didn't lose, she wouldn't suffer any death penalties. But when she was pleased thinking about it, she recalled the moment the player's arrow pierced her head. She also recalled the speech she had given to her troops regarding how easy it would be to defeat the humans. At that moment, she truly believed that with her full power, she would crush them all. However, her trembling hands and tears told a different story. Writing this while having a hot tea is simply the best. Cheers to you, character development. Sometime later, Wayne suddenly woke up in a bed, and the first thing that came to his mind was wondering if they had won. At that moment, Gilgamesh, who was beside him, told her that they were saying the subjugation had been a success. In short, they had done it. Obviously, that pleased Wayne, and the other quickly offered him his hand while telling him that they should meet up with everyone. Shortly after, they both met with the others, who immediately greeted them. Right after, Wayne bowed and deeply thanked them. However, Yoichi quickly replied that he should be the one thanking Wayne for calling them. On the other hand, Monkey Dive added that it had been a heated battle. He also said that he hadn't had one like that in a while. Afterward, Wayne also thanked Nameless Elf, who immediately replied that it was fine, before adding that it had been crazy. After all, the plan had assumed that the vanguard would die. But in the end, the rear guard had also been thinned a lot. They had about 30 people, but less than a third survived. Nameless Elf also said that the ones who had died had probably already respawned in their original towns. And Monkey Dive Sasuke replied that, in a situation where they didn't even know if the boss would show up, overwriting your respawn point would be too risky. Right after, Gilgamesh said that it was a shame what happened to the rear guard, especially since he wanted to talk to Mentalist a bit more, but currently, he should probably be back in his original town too. Nevertheless, at the next instant, Mentalist appeared, asking if they were talking about him, which shocked Gilgamesh. The newcomer then explained that, like them, he had also overwritten his respawn point to the royal capital. He then showed some ore to the others while explaining that, on his way there were tons of metal lumps scattered all over the city. After seeing that, Nameless Elf was surprised and explained that the moment they had beaten the boss, all the enemies turned into lumps of metal. Right after, Gilgamesh asked if that was the drop item, while Yoichi added that if it was all over the city, it didn't seem very rare or valuable. After hearing that, Monkey Dive complained, saying that the subjugation reward was worthless. Besides, Wayne realized at that moment that, given their situation, he couldn't pay everyone the reward he promised. Almost immediately, Nameless Elf tried to comfort him by saying that he didn't need to worry about giving them an amazing reward. Monkey Dive Sasuke seconded that by adding that they had gotten a fair amount of XP, which was confirmed by Gilgamesh, who had gotten a decent chunk even though he had died. That had been the same for Mentalist, who wondered out loud that if that was what was left after splitting it with 30 players, how much XP it was in total. Afterward, Yoichi said that getting to fight an event boss was the best kind of reward, and Wayne thanked them again. Then, they began to wonder what that boss was. Mentalist's theory was that it was an undead angel, and Gilgamesh said that Wayne had said something like that during the fight. For Mentalist, the fact that the Soul Stone, which allowed mental magic to affect undead type monsters, had been consumed was solid evidence supporting his theory. On top of that, even though it looked like an angel, the National Treasure still worked, and the Prime Minister had told them it was less effective against angels. The artifact name was Heart of the Spirit Lord, and they all agreed that it had an amazing effect, but since it was broken, they couldn't use it anymore. That artifact weakened all entities within the target area for 1 hour upon activation, except for 10 pre-registered individuals. Furthermore, if it was destroyed, the weakening effect was greatly enhanced for 10 seconds. To make things worse, Mentalist said that if the boss was truly undead, it might appear again during some revival event, and by that time, they wouldn't have the artifact. That made Gilgamesh feel uncomfortable, because he didn't want to fight that boss again. Nevertheless, Wayne knew that what Mentalist had said was true. They didn't have the artifact from the Prime Minister anymore. So, if they had to fight that boss again, they would need to improve their skills. Nevertheless, he also knew that if such a time came, he would like to fight alongside them again. Sometime later, Gilgamesh then said that everyone else had headed out before asking Wayne what the plan was, but Wayne said that he was not supposed to be the leader anymore. However, Mentalist quickly said that he believed that Wayne being the leader was fine. That surprised Gilgamesh because he didn't think that Mentalist was planning on sticking around, but the other said that he had also overwritten his respawn point because that was his intention, which pleased Gilgamesh a lot. Right after, Gilgamesh asked Wayne what his intention was, and the other replied that he would be happy if he could follow them. Almost immediately, they decided that they were forming a party from that moment onward and began to introduce themselves again. At that moment, Wayne thought that a party had been formed in the heat of the moment, but he ended up believing that it was fine because they were all top players. Nevertheless, when they were talking about going to the Mercenary Guild, a rumble happened, and the sky suddenly darkened. Right after, someone appeared floating in the sky, which shocked the trio. The newcomer then asked if they were the only ones left, but Wayne was too busy drowning in disbelief to reply because in front of them was no other than the Calamity, the boss they had just killed. Immediately thereafter, our protagonist, looking confident, said that, at that rate, fighting against them would be just bullying the weak.
Sometime before, back in our protagonist's headquarters, she had finally calmed down and said that she was glad that Carrie and the others didn't see her in such a pathetic state. She then thought that the last time she had cried that hard had been when her sister suddenly left home and abandoned her, and that had been a long time ago. In fact, she didn't know why she had thought of it. She then recalled the guy who was fighting her before and realized that he was Wayne. She then said that she had thought she had erased him along with Erfaden. Nevertheless, she didn't believe that her death had been Wayne's fault. She was aware that her defeat had been brought about by her own arrogance. Well, a little bit of self-awareness is never wrong. The amount of experience points she currently possessed was likely among the highest of all players. However, at the start of the game, she had received the initial value of 100 XP like any other player, and in an attempt to get a few more XP, she deliberately chose initial drawbacks, albinism, and poor eyesight. Therefore, she had no doubts that those drawbacks had contributed to her loss that time. By taking those two traits, she received an extra 50 XP, which meant that she had lost because of a mere 50 XP. On the other hand, if not for those 50 XP, she wouldn't have met the requirements for the subordinate skill that she had acquired back then. In fact, her beginning lay in those few points. In that game, everyone sought experience points because having enough XP meant more could be achieved. Just like money, jewels, or gold in the real world, a massive amount could lead people astray. She, who had acquired a massive amount of XP, was infatuated with them. In the end, the important thing was not being greedy and spending them wisely. She shouldn't be bewitched by the magic that the golden experience point possessed. Right after, she decided that she would first use the XP gained from destroying those 3 towns. She would get new skills and, of course, healing magic. Moreover, she also told herself that it would be good if she could acquire a skill that would negate her drawbacks. She also wanted to raise her pure combat power because there was no way she could forgive those who had killed her, and for the rematch, she would be absolutely sure she was prepared to take her revenge. Back to the present, Reare was thinking that the demonic eyes allowed her to see mana within her field of view. It was a skill that let her see not just mana in the air, but also the dense cluster of mana points in living things. With that, her vision wouldn't rely on visible light anymore. In other words, even with her eyes closed, she could see her surroundings quite well, covering the weakness of her poor eyesight. Right after, she thought that she might also be able to try a certain thing with her demonic eyes. Right after, Gilgamesh said that he believed that they had taken our protagonist down, before adding that she had more wings, which meant that she had clearly powered up. A stunned Wayne then asked if perhaps that event was not about subjugating the calamity, but to show her awakening, which shocked Gilgamesh, who immediately asked if the destruction of the Kingdom of Hyers was part of the event. Then Wayne asked rhetorically if that event was meant to introduce a new boss. After hearing their conversation, Reare thought that it seemed that they had mistaken her for an NPC event boss. And since she believed that it was convenient to her that way, she decided to play along with them. Almost immediately, she cast a spell called Discerning Feather Barrier before asking the trio where the others were and if there would be no arrows flying around during their battle. Right after, Gilgamesh asked Wayne what they should do, to which their leader replied that, since it should be a scripted loss, they should gather as much information as possible about the new boss, which amused Reare. Our protagonist then said that if they were not going to attack, they should have a little chat. She then asked Wayne what that debuff field he mentioned during the previous battle was. Of course, Wayne immediately replied that he would never tell her, and she just smirked while saying that he was being too cold, before adding that she would then finish them off and take the royal capital. Immediately thereafter, a huge army arrived, and Wayne identified them as the Knights of the Royal Capital, which pleased his partners, who wondered out loud if the Prime Minister had arranged it. After seeing that, Reare said that their arrival was quite the turnout, before adding that it should suffice, so it was time to start her revenge. Almost immediately, she threw a powerful magic attack against the army, stopping its advance. That surprised Gilgamesh, who said that it should not be possible because she didn't have that kind of attack before. The skill, Feather Gatling, fired countless bullets from the wings. She had used it as a warm-up, but it had ended up taking down more people than she expected. In fact, she still had plenty of new skills she wanted to try, so she preferred that those guys didn't die from something like that. What are you talking about? An army of ants doesn't replace the players that Arthur-san removed from the battlefield out of convenience. Reare then teased her enemies by saying that it was pathetic to die from such a weak attack, before adding that the main event was just starting. Right after, she cast Dark Implosion and sent a dark ball toward the army. At first, the knights wondered what it was, but almost immediately, the ball began to grow and ended up swallowing several knights before disappearing, shocking and confusing the rest. By staring at a target with demonic eyes and thinking of the spell she wanted, the skill Link Magic would cast the spell. With that combo, she could cast spells without speaking a single word, which was quite handy. At that moment, Gilgamesh cursed at her, while Wayne said that she had completely powered up. She then showed a maniacal expression, and told them that it would be a real problem for her if that was all it took to impress them, because her revenge had just begun. Immediately thereafter, she cast a more powerful AoE spell, decimating what remained of the army. Right after, she used another spell and captured Wayne. The player didn't know what had happened, and he ended up in midair, being grabbed by the neck. An amused Reare then asked him if he was not going to resist, before asking if he was fine not using that debuff field thing that time. However, Wayne remained silent for a while, and when he finally spoke, he ignored her questions and asked her why she was after the royal capital. After hearing that, our protagonist told him that he was being terribly selfish by seeking answers from her after refusing her questions. However, she decided to indulge him and replied that she was after the royal capital because it was beautiful, so beautiful that she had to make it hers, which shocked Wayne. She then added that once she had that beautiful city, she would fill it with her undead. Of course, that angered the player because the people of the city had died for such a reason, but Reare simply said that she didn't care what he believed. Right after, she told him that he could take that as a declaration of war, before adding that she would take everything she wanted and would eliminate anyone who got in her way. Then, she said that their little chat was over, before adding that it seemed that they were able to come back to life and that eventually she would go kill those other guys from earlier too. So, he should tell them to wait for her. After finishing her evil speech, she opened one of her eyes and bade Wayne farewell. Right after, she killed the player with another dark ball and told herself that it was time to trample the city, but almost immediately she could hear several voices calling her name and several pop-up windows appeared. That reminded her that an hour had passed, which meant that they had all managed to resurrect. Our protagonist then began to apologize to them because they had ended up dying so suddenly because of her. She also tried to ask them if they were all right, but she was cut off by them, who immediately asked her where she was. Reare said that she was at the royal capital, and Diaz immediately began to scold her for going there after perishing mere moments before. She then smirked and told Deus that just because she was defeated once, she shouldn't abandon all of her plans. She is doubling down on getting cocky, right? Our protagonist added that she was still taking the royal capital, and after noticing that Diaz was silent, she told him that she was glad he understood. Right after, she ordered Carrie and the others to proceed to the volcano area and continue gathering information. Then, she said that she would summon the Adamant Squad again to handle things at the royal capital, and shortly after, several skeleton soldiers began to appear at the battlefield. Right after, she told herself that she should find the inn, before adding that, on their side, if she alone was defeated, the battle line collapsed. However, players could coordinate and attack in any number, so she wanted to crush their respawn points to reduce their numbers. Of course, if some players on the monster side could coordinate with her, it would be a different story. However, she always played solo and didn't have any friends, no matter how much she tried to deny it. In the end, she told herself that it was fine because even without friends, she had powerful minions. Right after, she summoned Sieg and told the skeleton knight that she was entrusting him with command of the Adamant Squad. He quickly obeyed and replied that he would also summon skeletons to advance their suppression efforts, and our protagonist told him that she was counting on him. Sieg quickly summoned several skeletons and ordered them to ignore those fleeing on horseback and focus on taking control of the city. After seeing that, Reare told him that he would leave the government of the royal capital to him. However, she was interrupted by Diaz, who arrived while being carried by a skeleton soldier. That shocked our protagonist, and she asked him how he had gotten there, since she couldn't believe that he had run all the way from the Great Leaf Forest. Siege then explained that Diaz was carried on the back of a skeleton he had summoned, and Diaz added that he was temporarily considered to be equipment and was summoned along with that skeleton, which surprised Reare since she didn't know that could be done. Deus then said that he was the Queen's royal guard, so he should use everything at his disposal to hasten to her side. However, that still surprised her because she hadn't called for him. She then thought that those NPCs really had advanced AI, because they adapted to unclear commands as humans did, and they also could use that ambiguity to interpret things their own way and force their own desires into it, which made our protagonist smile because she found it interesting. Right after, Reare said that it couldn't be helped, before adding that they were about to storm the castle, so the three of them should go. She then thought that it was just a little further until checkmate. Reare was storming the castle with a small force of undead. However, in the middle of a corridor, they were intercepted by a knight. Sadly, even before the knight could finish warning the intruders, one of them mercilessly insta-killed him. Once they took care of all the enemies in the corridor, they invited our protagonist to join them, and she quickly did, so the three of them kept advancing. Shortly after, they arrived in front of a big door, and before the undead knight could tell her where they were, she quickly said that she already knew and asked them to go inside. Once inside, they were ambushed by a squad of mages who fired several spells toward the trio, but Reare quickly blocked them by beating one of her wings. Nevertheless, that first attack was just a diversion, and the real one came immediately after when three knights used the explosion as cover to try to catch her off guard. Unfortunately for those knights, the undead ones were faster and insta-killed them. Right after, Reare smirked at the nobles who were inside before asking them if they were satisfied, which shocked them. Still, one of them managed to regain his composure and ask her if she was the calamity that had attacked the royal capital. Great job, Sherlock. It seems we have a candidate for the Captain Obvious role here. After hearing that, Reare replied that when inquiring about someone's identity, you were supposed to introduce yourself first, before adding that the noble was being quite impolite. Well, I'd say it is also impolite to storm into someone else's castle without an invitation. I don't know, just saying. Of course, the noble quickly rebutted, saying that what she had said also applied to her, before adding that if she wanted to visit someone's home, she should make an appointment first. He even dared to ask her if she had no manners. Okay, this guy has guts, I'll give him that. After hearing that, she disdainfully smiled before saying that it had been her mistake and that she had indeed been rude. Right after, she replied to the man's question and confirmed that she was the one everyone was calling a calamity. However, she clarified that she didn't introduce herself like that to anyone, before adding that she didn't understand why everyone was calling her that. The noble then said that earlier she should have been vanquished by those brave mercenaries before asking her how she had come back to life. Reare then disdainfully smiled at the nobles before stating that she had no reason to respond to that question. At that moment, one of the nobles asked the man who was talking to Reare if she was the servant of an even greater being. The other nobles then began to speculate that our protagonist might be the servant of the Archangel, even though she didn't match any angels described in their texts. Right after, a young guy said that, according to the report from the knights dispatched to La Colline, Reare commanded insects. Meanwhile, our protagonist was thinking that information kept pouring in even though she was not doing anything. After all, they all kept blabbering. Still, she began to reflect on the matter of angels and archangels and the fact that they kept using the name Calamity. However, it hadn't been that long since she had become a demon lord, so she assumed that since the name Calamity was so widely used, there had probably been several calamities before her. Right after, she decided to toy with them a little. She nonchalantly said that she was indeed the Archangel and commanded them to bow before her. Nevertheless, the noble who was talking to our protagonist said that she was lying before admitting that she was very clever. After seeing his reaction, she asked him what made him say that, to which he replied that if she wanted to know, he would show her. Almost immediately, he revealed a staff he was hiding and quickly cast a spell called Vein of the Spirit Lord. After seeing that, Rare's first thought was that the man was casting the debuff field from before, but almost instantly she realized that it was not the case. After all, the item was not creating a field, but targeting her. She then wondered if it was suppressing her power directly. Afterward, the man yelled at her that the fact that the vein of the Spirit Lord weakened her was proof that she was not an angel. At that moment, the undead knights asked in a very low voice if the man had mentioned the Spirit Lord. Reare noticed it, but the man didn't hear them and said that the staff was a treasure left behind by the ancient spirit lord for the good of humanity. He then added that the item cast a curse that stole power from evil beings like our protagonist. Wow, okay, you can also give her the instruction manual. He then told her that what had led to her earlier death had also been a treasure bestowed by the ancient spirit lord. But before he could finish the sentence, both undead knights snapped and told the man to stop messing with them. Right after, they unleashed their powers and astonished everybody in the hall, Reare included. Shortly after, all the people in there began to feel like they were choking, and Reare quickly asked the undead knights what the heck was happening. However, before the knights could reply, a pop-up window appeared before her, indicating that her follower had fulfilled a condition for reincarnation. The system also informed her that she could spend 1000 XP to reincarnate, and then asked if she wanted to allow the reincarnation. After reading the notification, she recalled that the system had told her that the greater Philosopher's Stone could no longer be used on the undead knights since she had already used it on those two. In fact, she had assumed that they should have evolved to the point of being unable to reincarnate any further. So, she didn't know what condition they had just fulfilled. But the thing was that, apparently, she could evolve them past that limit. Still, the required amount of experience points was pretty high. Besides, she couldn't help but think, why at that moment, of all times? However, she was sure that if she missed that chance, she might never get another one, so she told herself that there was no need to hesitate and confirm the reincarnation. Almost immediately, both knights were surrounded by a powerful black energy that ended up shooting upward to the ceiling. The entire place began to tremble, and another notification appeared, saying that a special being of calamity, an immortal ruler, had been born. Nevertheless, what shocked both Reare and the man who was talking to her was that the two undead knights had turned back into humans, Diaz of Rage, who looked like an old dark knight, and Shige of Grief, who looked like a young dark knight. Thanks for watching, and thanks to all of the supporters that made this video possible. If you would like to help the channel, please use the QR code in the screen. And last but not least, a super thanks to our high-ranking supporters: Arizona Gold, 1090, Fallen Stella, Joel Alvarado, Julian Hernandez, Kildrak, Hitsuka, Lucifer Highrise, Not Omega's Foot Fungus, Pawe Jajeski, and NATO Enthusiast. Thanks, and have a nice day.